Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Not a problem. Good evening, Council. We'll call our special council meeting to order for Wednesday, March the 22nd, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. Number one is a call to order. 2 is declaration of pecuniary interest, either now or at the time of. Any members have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. 3 is our approval of the agenda. We have a motion of the agenda of the special council meeting for March the 22nd, 2023 be approved as presented. A mover, Deputy Mayor LaRose. Seconder, Councillor Marchand. Call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. Item 4 is in-camera items. We have a motion that in accordance with the Town of Penetanguishene Procedural Bylaw 2019-25, the Council of the Town of Penetanguishene move into an in-camera session to discuss personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, regarding a human resources matter. Looking for a mover? Councillor Waters, seconder. Councillor Marchand. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. We'll convene an in-camera session. We'll be back at the conclusion.
It's just a sound check. Testing. 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 Hello. Sarah Marshall, can you hear me? Is your speaker working? Testing. Testing.
Hi, Sarah, can you hear me?
Hello.
Hi, Doug, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. George made it to Florida.
No, I'm in Beckley, West Virginia. Sorry, Doug, I'm in Beckley, West Virginia. You're on mute.
Good evening, council. We're just coming out of our closed session. We have a motion that council of the town of Pansangashing rise from an in-camera session with a report. Look for a mover. Deputy Mayor LaRue, seconder. Councillor Marshall. Further comments or questions on that? See none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. And Madam Clerk, we have a motion on that, do we not? In open now?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the decision made in camera. So the motion would be that staff to be approved to proceed as directed within the in-camera session.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll look for a mover on that motion. Deputy Mayor LaRue, seconder. Councillor Marchand. Any comments or questions on that motion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. Thank you. 6 is question period from the media and public regarding our closed session we had at 6:30, which we're just about to close up. We had a 6:30 meeting, which our procedure bylaw right now does not allow our council members to participate virtually. So only the members that were here participating in that because it was a closed session. So they'll be participating here in 4 minutes. Any other questions in media and public regarding our 6:30 agenda? Seeing none, we'll look for adjournment at 7:09. We'll mover. Councillor Waters, seconder. Councillor DeRush, all in favor and opposed? That is carried. We'll be back in about 1 minute and 30 seconds with our next agenda. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our special committee of the whole for Wednesday, March the 22nd, 2023. Thank you for your patience. We're wrapping up our 6:30 meeting. I'm going to call us to order at 7:11 p.m. Thank you for your attendance and participation tonight. And good evening, Councillor LaRue and Councillor Vadaban-Kerr connecting remotely tonight.
Good evening, Your Worship.
Number 2 is our approval of the agenda. We have recommended that the special committee of the whole agenda for March 22nd, 2023 be approved as presented. A mover? Councillor Marshall, seconder. Councillor DeRush. Any other revisions or discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. It's a little delayed. Number 3 is our declaration of pecuniary interest, either now or at the time of. Do any members have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. 4 is our consent agenda. A is our Arena Recreation Center study preliminary financial analysis. Jeff, were you or Carrie going to speak to this? Or we consent?
Your Worship, it's up to council. If there's questions, certainly I think Carrie would be prepared to answer them. But we did provide it on consent for information purposes.
Thank you. Any members have any questions or comments regarding the consent agenda on this item for staff?
Thank you, sorry, Your Worship. I just noticed a bit of a procedural error in that consent agenda item. There should be a motion to receive that for information.
Thank you. Councillor Vadaban-Kerr, I believe you may have a question.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent report. I think that I'd like to pull it and ask staff to give a quick overview of the report, because I think it's really fundamental to our discussion that's going to be taking place a little bit later in the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Vadabonker. We'll turn to you, Carrie.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Vadabonker's request, I will provide a brief summary of the preliminary financial analysis consent report that I've done related to the Arena Recreation Center study. So that was completed in 2021, and on August 11th of that year, Council did approve staff to continue to gather information related to option 2A, which was a new build that accommodated curling as well. And the purpose of this report being presented on this agenda alongside with the 51 Dunlop Street property report and presentation was to provide just a high-level summary of the financial implications related to option 2A and the costing of which that was outlined in the Arena Recreation Center study. It did state at that time that the approximate cost would be $49 million with an annual operating budget of $407,000. So what I did was I did some research in terms of other similar municipal projects and how they were funded and how much in particular they received in subsidies, for example. So there are 5 municipal projects: Wasaga Beach, Bracebridge, Township of Wellesley, and King Township and Town of East Gwillimbury. So those projects ranged from $27 million to approximately $76 million. This high-level financial analysis does exclude some things such as inflation. So we're still looking at the consultant's 2021 costs. Until such time that we choose and finalize an option as well as a site, we have excluded inflation as well as land acquisition if necessary, any environmental remediation if necessary, and any capital financing. We have been told by Public Works Department and our manager of capital projects that project management typically is 1.5% of the total project cost. So we have included $735,000 in this high level summary. So based on those 2021 costs, it's almost $50 million for option 2A, which is a new build with curling. Operating costs of approximately $407,000, as I mentioned. Within the report under financial implications, I might add that in the ARC study itself, under section 10.1 and section 10.2, the consultant does discuss capital funding considerations and partnership collaborations. So I just went on to analyze currently what our potential funding sources were and the status of those at this time. So, for example, we have reserves that could be utilized, development charges. Again, the development charges background study would be updated, is going to be updated in 2024. We would have to get this project in the development charges background study to start collecting development charges towards this project. Certainly there are grant applications that could be done when certain steps of the process are done and we're in what the government likes as a shovel-ready position for the project. Certainly there are user fees. So the annual anticipated operating cost of a new facility, we believe would be offset. Any increased expenses outside of our budget we'll know more when we choose a concept and finalize some operating estimated costs. But we would assume that user fees, increased user fees and generated revenues would offset the increased operating cost from the facility. And again, this entire report is based on a lot of assumptions, I might add, and estimates. Other sources of potential funding would be partnerships and sponsorships, certainly fundraising, a capital fundraising campaign and committee, as well as financing, whether it be internal financing through our reserve fund, or whether it be external debenture from Infrastructure Ontario. Again, partnering with external entities such as public-private partnerships or nonprofit partnerships, cooperation between neighboring municipalities, preliminary partnership interest, for example, the Penetanguishene Curling Club, Penetanguishene Sports Hall of Fame, concession operator, etc. Programming partnerships, for example, Boys and Girls Club of North Simcoe, recreation programmers, and tenancy agreements, potentially, for example, with a concession operator or the Penetanguishene Curling Club for that scenario. When you look at the total project cost estimate based on 2021 dollars of just shy of $50 million, I also did a breakdown of an anticipated and estimated breakdown of where some of those funds could come from. As I mentioned, the ones that we currently have, and certainly the ones that we need to grow in terms of capital fundraising, in terms of development charges, reserves, etc. Also included in the potential source of funds would be land sales of town property that we own and could, some valuable town land. For example, the current location of the Penetanguishene Curling Club would be an example that could potentially contribute quite a bit of proceeds towards this facility and the estimated costs. So that's just an example, a scenario of the breakdown of the total project cost, assuming, you know, there are some successful grant applications, etc. And obviously, as I mentioned, once the site, the concept, and obviously the project itself is approved, certainly more in-depth and a long-term financial plan would be created based on those decisions that council makes in the future. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Any members of the council have any further comments or questions for Carrie? Councilor Marshall.
I just wanted to add, I really appreciate that you provided us with an overview of some other municipalities that have just done some recent builds in capital. It really, it made me feel good to get a sense of where we fell in terms of our population, our size, and what we're looking at in terms of a project of this magnitude, because it's significant for the town. And as a hockey parent, you travel to all different kind of arenas, and you see all these great different concepts that municipalities are coming together with. And it really is about this community space. I've seen a lot of the library arena concepts with a common space, and they're just really wonderful energy in some of these communities. And so I really do appreciate that we had the opportunity that you've laid out for us, what some of those other projects are coming in at. So that really it makes me feel more comfortable in terms of really understanding when we look at a project of this magnitude, where we compare and with other up-to-date and recent programs. So if you haven't driven by Wasaga Beach lately, like I'm excited to see that new recreation center for them, because they also have an old barn for an arena. And so I really do appreciate that information in the report.
Thank you. Any other members have any comments or questions? Councilor Van Bunker.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, so just echo some of Councillor Marchand's comments. It's an excellent report. It really gives us a starting point with respect to where we're at and what we may have to look at it's a $50 million project for all intents and purposes. And you can see, again, on a very preliminary basis, that it's proposed or being considered as 50% grant funding. And municipalities have not been historically very successful in these large capital grants. I can speak from experience in my previous life in Wasaga Beach. We were not successful. Bracebridge was successful, but it was successful in a supplementary grant program. I can't remember the name of the grant program, but it did get some grant funding as outlined in the report. I think this is something that we have to keep in mind, this financial analysis, as we go into the discussion in the next section of the agenda. We have to keep these costs in mind. I've been saying to people who have been very excited about the project, and I'm excited about the project as well, but it's not a project, in my opinion, that can be done in the short term. It's a longer term project just because of the financial implications. $50 million is a huge number for a municipality the size of Penetanguishene. And we've, the treasurer outlines some of that in her report about the financial capacity of the municipality to take on a project of this magnitude. I just want to touch on the development charges component for a second, because the treasurer does outline that there's a small allocation for the growth potential confirmed in the DC study. But basically what we're doing is we're replacing existing. So we have a single pad arena. We're going to be proposing a new single pad arena, where we have an existing curling club. We're going to propose a new curling club. So we're replacing existing with existing. Now, there may be components that are growth related, like the walking track does not exist now, and that might be eligible for development charge funding. So we just need to keep in mind some of these matters, because the numbers could be impacted, or the figures could be impacted based on the development charges that could be attributed to this project. The treasurer also outlines the status of the reserves, and our reserves are not plentiful as it comes to recreation facilities. We have an overall asset management reserve, but even that is not a large reserve. So as a municipality, we have our work cut out for us if we're going to embark on such an ambitious project, and I think we should, but we need to keep in mind some of these financial realities. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Vadebunker. Councillor Roux, any comments on this item?
Not at the moment, Your Worship. I do definitely intend to agree with both Councillors Vadebunker and Marchand. The scope of the project is very large, and for a small municipality of our size, but I think I will reserve to further into the discussions, particularly when we get to the 51 Dunlop Street.
Thank you. Any other members? Any comments, questions on this item? Seeing none, so we have a motion that the consent agenda be received for information. I'll look for a mover. Deputy Mayor LaRose, seconder, Councillor Marshall. Any further comments? Call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. 5 is matters for consideration. We'll start with the presentation. I believe you're going to lead us off, CO Lees, and then we'll do the motion after we've done fruitful information and discussion tonight. It's over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk us through, or at least lead us off through a presentation. The presentation is included in the agenda package that was released on Friday. And essentially, there's really kind of 5 components, if I can say, to the presentation. And while we're getting the presentation pulled up, I'll just say that this was a joint effort. So the staff report that is in front of members of council and was released as part of the agenda was a joint staff report with input from several different departments and senior leaders. So you'll see not just myself carrying some of the ball with this presentation, and certainly there was a bulk of and a variety of information provided from both recreation and land use planning, as well as our clerk from a communications perspective. And certainly Sarah helped as well pull the presentation and make it look pretty what you see this evening. So we'll move on to the next slide. The presentation is really, I'm going to lead us off through a bit of history with respect to 51 Dunlop and the property and how we got to where we are today, as well as we're going to have Steve Langlois with MB Consultants, who is with us virtually this evening. He was the lead on the Arena and Recreation Center study. So he's going to walk us through a good portion of the presentation, followed by some land use planning components from our Director of Planning and Community Development, Andrea Betty, and followed by some community engagement pieces that our clerk, Stacy Cooper, is going to lead us through. And then there will be some gaps and some other information that will be filled in, I'm sure, throughout the conversation on this particular topic through Sherry Desjardins, our Director of Rec and Community Services. And then I'll close us off through walking us through the options that we've included in the report and the recommendation and how we came to be with that recommendation. So if we move on to the next slide, this slide really just depicts what our recreation and Community Services Master Plan that was completed in 2014. There was a series of recommendations in that study that ultimately helped guide us and helped get us to where we are today. So it really is a journey. It's not a sprint when you start to plan for these types of asset replacements in communities. There were 4 kind of key recommendations that fed us to where we are today. The first one really talked about continuing to upgrade and maintain the existing facility at that we have with our community center arena. The second one really talked about starting to plan for the replacement of a facility or a complex, and it goes into a number of different pieces there, but really the crux of that was based on a single pad. The third recommendation was doing a location and feasibility analysis for a new multi-use rec facility, which as we know has been completed as part of our ARC study. And the fourth one was really contingent on kind of the prior recommendations, starting to develop a new facility, a new complex. And then it did outline a number of different components, core components that it should include. And of course, if we fast forward to the ARC study that was just completed within the last few years, it kind of gave a more up-to-date picture of what perhaps components should be included in a new build. If we move on to the next slide, the next kind of key piece in terms of why we are where we are today was through our community-based strategic plan that we completed in 2019. So it was a 5-year strategic plan. We're rounding out kind of the latter part of that strategic plan. And as the community and as council and as staff are aware, we are undergoing a new strategic plan process that is actually in its very infancy stages, and we're pleased that that process is being kicked off. That strategic plan had a significant amount of public participation, as well as staff and council participation, and we really looked at where does this community headed over the next 5 years. And there were kind of 3 pieces I want to touch on that kind of fed us to a couple different goals and directions that I'll highlight on the next 2 slides. But we had 31 public in-person consultations, and those were really a series of open houses, meetings with different committees and boards. We had some workshops with council and senior team. We had some public meetings at Georgian Village. So just a number of different in-person consultations. We had randomly selected 400 surveys through the property tax roll. We had about a 33% response rate in that random sample. And then closing that off, we had in excess of 200 survey responses. So we made available surveys both electronically as well as in hard copy form, and for a 30-day period, and we did receive in excess of 200. So that kind of feeds us into our kind of two main pieces out of our strategic plan that again support us to why we are here today. And the first one, if we go to the next slide, talks about one of the recreation goals, and that is really around the community enjoying modern and accessible opportunities for sport, fitness, and rec activities for all ages. And you can see on there, I won't read it, but the strategic direction, which kind of dives a little bit deeper, talks about upgrading our indoor facilities. And then the initiative below that talks about ensuring the reuse of two key sites in this community, which is the former Penetanguishene Secondary School, i.e. 51 Dunlop, which is why we're here this evening, as well as the Penetanguishene Hospital sites. And it talks about, for the purposes being beneficial to the community, and it kind of touches on a broad scope of different potential uses. And so that's one of the two strategic plan goals that lead us to where we are today. And if we move to the next one, is really just talking about being responsible from a financial end of things and managing the public funds and public assets, facilities would be included, in a responsible way. And so I think it's been touched on by members of council through the consent report on this evening's agenda, but certainly, being prudent and forward-looking from a financial management perspective is going to be vital as this conversation continues. And it really is a journey. It's not a 50-meter dash. It's not a 50-meter sprint to get to, where we eventually need to get to with our aging facilities, I should say. So with that, I would just say that that kind of gives a little bit of the background and history and how we got to where we are today. I didn't touch on the land acquisition at 51 Dunlop, but certainly I think we touch on it briefly in the report. But ultimately, the municipality saw an opportunity in 2019. It's hard to believe that it was that many years ago. But the municipality saw an opportunity in 2019 when the school board was declaring that site surplus. Through council direction in camera, we took advantage of that opportunity, went through the provincial regulated process, and eventually were the successful proponent with purchasing 51 Dunlop. There's a lot of history with respect to the land and the building the structure that was on the site, which certainly is available, and we've touched on that previously. So we've been purposeful not to get into that depth today, because as we know, the site is vacant. The building was demolished for all the right reasons. And part of, mostly why we're here this evening is to talk about the future use of that vacant site at 51 Dunlop. So with that, Your Worship, if you don't mind, I'd like to pass the reins over to Steve Langlois. Steve is a main lead with Monteith Brown Planning Consultants. He'll be a familiar face to probably a lot of folks, and he's going to lead us through the bulk of the remainder of the presentation. But there certainly will be some guest appearances from not only Andrea and Stacy, and then I'll round us off at the end. So with that, Sarah, Steve Langlois will take it from here. Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Can everyone hear me? Excellent. So thank you, CAO Lise, for the introduction there. I'll ask to move on to the next slide. I do have about 30 slides to get through. I will try to move at a pace, and I'd be happy to discuss any questions that you do have when we get to the end. CAO Lise has spoken to sort of some of the history around this particular proposal, the conversation there starting around the 2014 master plan, the 2019 strategic plan, and that's where we came on board in 2020, 2021, and July of 21, when town council received the Arena and Recreation Center study and recommended that staff return with further information as it relates to the long-term financial planning and implications of a new build. And we'll start to unpack a little bit of that today. I recognize that the study that we were involved in was completed nearly 2 years ago, and some things may have changed. So these types of projects do tend to evolve, and I'm sure will continue to evolve over the months and years to come. But we do need a starting point, and that's where the ARC study comes in. Next slide, please. So a bit about the ARC study. Your council, your administration recognize that the Penetangwisheen Memorial Community Center, the arena, and the curling club were aging facilities and required increasing investment over time. The purpose of the study was to plan for their future and also to address, and this is an important aspect here, is to address the evolving long-term needs of the community. So we would look at the arenas, we would look at the curling facility and the spaces that they offer, but also other amenities that might be required in your community moving forward. This study, like a lot of the projects that were referenced earlier in the financial plan, is a necessary prerequisite for becoming grant ready. It lays out the voice and needs of the community and informs your long-term financial planning. So, and that was a big part of it, is to start creating some definition around this facility. By planning ahead, it ensures that the town can provide community responsive services where they want, when they want, and how they want to serve the community for the next 50 years. As part of our team, Monteith Brown Planning, we're based out of London, Ontario. We've been doing this sort of work for over 45 years. I've dedicated my career the last 20 plus years to recreation and parks projects. We've completed over 400, nearly 500 across Ontario. So we do bring a depth of experience. We also, we're fortunate to be joined by MJMA Architects out of Toronto. They are a leading architect of recreation centers across the province and well beyond, as well as the JF Group, who's a leading business consultant to the sector. So a bit about our study process. This began in 2020 with the phase 1, phase 2 work, culminated in mid 2021 with finalization. Really, so it was a very comprehensive undertaking. The goal of the study was to really answer those 4 or 5, I guess 4 questions at the left. What do we want to achieve? What facilities are needed? How will we get there? And that will be a big part of, I'm sure, what we talk about a bit today. Different options, timing, locations, partnerships, and how much will it cost? Not just to build, but also to operate. Building is a one-time cost. Maintaining, operating is an annual ongoing 40, 50-year cost. So that's also something to keep in mind. Next slide. I'll look a little bit about, speak a little bit about the 2 current facilities within your community that are really at the core of the study. The PMCC, the Penetangwisheen Memorial Community Center and Arena, was built in 1954 with additions in 83 and 2007. So it does make it one of the older facilities in at least the ice structure, one of the older ones remaining in Ontario. As you know, it contains single ice surface, the Brian Orser Hall, Sports Hall of Fame. Those are some of the key aspects there. We know it's well used, particularly for ice sports during the winter, late fall, winter, early spring. Ball hockey is another major user of the facility as well. Through the BCA, the building condition audit work that the town authorized, $6 million in repairs were identified as being needed over the course of the next 20 years. So all of that speaks to, and from an asset management perspective, a facility that is in poor condition, meaning that about 20% of its replacement value was required to be reinvested into it, with some major items. Roof, that's in large part, I understand, been addressed to extend the longevity of the facility as you're planning for its future. The rink slab, the boards, those are large expenses as well. But we recognize that capital needs are rising, utility costs, operational costs are rising, and it's a challenge to offer some of these modern amenities and spaces and programs that are more commonplace in multi-use recreation facilities throughout the province. Also, the assessment suggested that it was not feasible to expand at this location. Next slide. We've identified a few advantages, disadvantages, just to inform the discussion. This is not an exhaustive list, but from our perspective, these are some of the things that do stand out. On the plus side, on the pros, it is a well-built facility for its time. It appears to be structurally sound. We heard from groups that I think it was ball hockey in particular. They love the playing surface. It's one of the best in the region. There have been some barrier-free accessibility improvements over the years to make it more accessible for persons with disabilities. Again, the ice rink as an element does get well used. Its location is central within the town. The Hall of Fame is a unique draw within your community, and I've mentioned the roof upgrade. On the other side of the coin, some of the things that we heard and saw through our investigations, we know it's an aging facility requiring greater investment. The ice surface is 180 feet long. Regulation these days is 200. There are still some smaller rinks of this size. There are many of them still in operation, but through replacement, the Wasaga Beach and other facilities, they're recommending NHL size ice surfaces. It does, just because of the footprint that we have to deal with, does have some lack of other amenity spaces that are more common: gender neutral washrooms, change rooms, upgraded showers. And as we start thinking about as we start to think beyond the rink and what's not available, but maybe required within a growing community, it doesn't have some of these contemporary spaces that you'll see in some other facilities, like around gymnasiums, walking tracks, dry land training, larger lobbies for gathering and whatnot. I mentioned that the expansion potential is highly limited and the rising costs for operation are apparent. Next slide. So same sort of profile here for the Penetangmishing Curling Club. This was built in 73, 74 with a renovation about 20 years ago. It is town-owned, on town-owned lands, but operated by a club under agreement. There's 5 curling sheets there, and it's used by the club for about 70% of the year. Town has an option for summer use and some use during other parts of the year as well. Similar sort of analysis was undertaken by your engineers. It's also a structure that's considered to be poor. The replacement value, the utility of this facility has a lower value than your arena, but 1.15 million in repairs replacement were identified as being needed at that time. Next slide. Some key advantages: 5 curling sheets seems to be adequate for meeting current and anticipated needs. It's enabled the club to support many notable bonspiels and events. It's a well-known, well-established rink with a number of high-profile curlers that have learned their craft and brought quite a bit of notoriety to your community. The large lounge, the club loves it. Offers revenue potential. It's part of what they see as being part of the club atmosphere that's required for their operation. We understand the ice plant was recently upgraded through efforts, large part by the club. The club often seeks grants to assist with those sorts of things. And again, it is available for some community use within the bounds of your agreement. On the other side of that coin, your strat plan and other documents have spoken to the fact that this is maybe not the highest and best use of this primary waterfront land. Your previous council, again, endorsed an option to consider development options for those lands. We recognize some building components are deteriorating. It's requiring greater investment. We recognize curling access to the curling surface, lower level, are not barrier free and accessible for persons with disabilities. The washroom capacities can be a challenge for larger events. And again, that same note around expansion upgrade potential is fairly limited. Now, back to the study and our approach to it, it really was an evidence-based model that we used. We built it from the ground up. We looked at really 5 key things. I'll touch on several of these today. Your guiding documents, we've mentioned your master plan, your strategic plan, your building condition audits, demographics, who's living in your community, who will be living there, how is that changing? Public consultation, I have a few slides on that. I'll touch on it in a moment. Condition and design, I've spoken a bit to some of those limitations, and usage and trends. The next slide will speak to demographics and community context. Just updated the statistic based on the 2021 stats can number, but your town has a population now just exceeding 10,000. The forecast that we had for the study indicated that was going to grow by about 13% by 2031. There was a recognition that the town's population was aging, and really this is a trend that we're seeing across the nation. That infographic in the lower right shows the population forecast for Simcoe County, and you'll see over the next 10 or so years really where that growth is expected to occur. And you see 61% increase in the number of seniors aged 70 plus. And then other age groups are still continuing to increase, but at a much lower pace. And we look particularly at that core arena market, which is your kids getting on skates around age 3 or even sooner in some cases, and playing until into their adulthood. But certainly that 5 to 19 age range is a core user group for arenas in particular, and for curling tends to skew quite a bit older. So these are considerations as we look forward. Next slide. The study also had a deep dive into various trends within the sector, what other communities are seeing and doing, and how they're reacting to a more sophisticated and rising expectations around recreation service delivery. So there's a lot, I know, going on this slide, but it's very important that we do have a view towards what's changing and those trends, trying to anticipate those shifts in demand, shifts in participation, and other design considerations that impact participation. Ultimately, it's the goal for any municipality to make sure that its residents lead active and healthy lifestyles. And through your facilities, through your programs, and those of other community providers, you're really able to deliver on that mandate. So I mentioned the aging population, that focus on active living and wellness, growing in importance. Pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, it's all the same. I think we're all trying to find ways to stay active and engaged. Growth in unstructured activities. 40 years ago, 60 years ago, really when the arena was built, hockey was the thing to do in the winter, that and curling, baseball maybe in the summer. We look at soccer emerged, basketball emerged, different forms of fitness have become now commonplace, and over the last 10 years we've been talking much more about pickleball, for example. So there's quite a bit of growth and diversity within the sector. And from a design perspective, multi-use facilities are really true, can act as true community hubs. I'll speak more on that in a few moments. But through building them to contemporary design standards, ensure that they're barrier-free, that they're inclusive, that they're safe spaces that also embody and help you achieve your climate change and green goals, potentially alongside other partners as well. Next slide. So a bit about, and this is point in time. This is data that we pulled from the ARC study, through working with your community services department, through our stakeholder consultation. We were able to vet a lot of this information. This just is a snapshot of what we heard at that time. In terms of ice usage, we looked very closely at your arena. We also looked closely at the North Simcoe facility in Midland, because that also serves many of your groups and many of your residents. We recognize that both facilities were generally operating at capacity for primetime ice. That's not unusual. I think there's almost every arena in Ontario still operates pretty close to capacity when it comes to primetime ice, but that primetime window is shrinking. It's 5 o'clock to 9 a.m. or sorry, 9 p.m., 5 o'clock to 10 p.m. weekends, there's fewer kids playing in the morning, there's fewer kids playing later at night. As an industry trend, that is the way it's going. We saw some morning ice rentals within your community, suggesting that demand was solid at that time. I think most communities are trying to build back out of the pandemic with organized sport. Still a bit of I think what we're seeing in smaller communities such as yours, it's coming back faster. Some larger centers, there's maybe not as strong of a connection to some of those sports. So that's a trend that we continue to monitor, might evolve as we continue to emerge from the pandemic. Girls hockey in particular is one that's really been growing over the years. I want to see how that changes perhaps. So, but all in all, the number of ice registrants really had been relatively unchanged over the course of the last number of years in Penetanguishene, suggesting that maybe it's the same number of kids using more hours if they have access to them, but not seeing a lot of growth in overall demand. Youth ball hockey participation had been declining. In terms of curling, it's a bit of an ebb and flow sort of sport. We know it gets a lot of profile in Olympic years. We know it's through membership pushes. A lot of clubs can do really well to build up their memberships, and many of them are working hard to sustain them as well. Your club had 192 members a few years ago. That was really sort of pre-pandemic. We also recognize there's another club operated in Midland. The trend within the sector, at least in Ontario, is consolidation and amalgamation of clubs. There have been many facilities in particular that are owned by curling clubs that have failed in the last decade or so because of aging infrastructure and the inability to support through a reduced membership any significant investment within those facilities. So it is something worth monitoring. I mentioned earlier the popularity of new recreation activities, pickleball being just one, but there are many that can find a home within multi-use recreation centers, really that provide that one-stop experience for all ages. Next slide. So I mentioned community engagement, and we had engagement at two phases within our process. The first phase consisted of an open house. We were hoping to have that in person, just given the time frame of that in late 2020. That was shifted to online. So we had information. There was a project webpage for all of everything involved in this study. We had 157 submissions that were provided through that particular engagement tactic. That's itemized in great detail within our report and what we heard, and I have a slide on that in a moment. We also reached out to every user group that's a regular participant and user within your arena facility, as well as other potential partners and others that have interests within this realm, including the Curling Club, Sports Hall of Fame, and others. So we had 21 groups providing input, some written input, some interviews, some part of workshop series. And it's important to recognize that these groups represent hundreds of your residents, if not thousands, through their memberships. And then at the tail end of our process, we reached out and had another online open house to present the findings of our report, which was drafted at that time. We had about 20 people attend and participate in that session. So I'll report on those findings in a moment as well. And as well that we were always welcoming of written submissions. And I think what you see sometimes is, and we saw this with your consultation for 51 Dunlop, where you had 763 participants, which was a growing or a larger number than we were able to connect with. But the more tangible a project is, the more specific and site specific it is, folks do tend to come out. So, it's a matter of building an audience. And again, the more specific it is, that tends to generate the input. Next slide. So through that first phase of consultation that we held, we heard strong support for a new recreation center containing one or more ice pads, so one or two ice pads, a walking track, program space, gymnasium. It wasn't listed on here, but we also heard an expression for additional indoor swimming activities and opportunities. So that was a common request. But you'll see sort of in the 50+%, this is out of the 157 submissions, arena for ice skating, track, older adult activities, child activities, gymnasium, and curling rink. Next slide. So from those 20+ groups that we spoke to, again, similar drumbeat here, strong support expressed for a new recreation center with similar components. Satisfaction with your current arena was mixed. We heard about challenges with the seating, being uncomfortable, being just not necessarily meeting needs, a demand for upgraded change rooms, washrooms, lack of a walking track, lack of dryland training space, and lack of storage. We heard from some potential partners at the time. We recognize that may change and that might evolve as this project moves forward. And we'd encourage you, I have another slide on that later on to speak to partnerships. But we heard from the Georgian Bay TD Council, the Ascanonia Senior Center, the Curling Club, Sports Hall of Fame, all expressing some form of preliminary interest in a new facility. And we also spoke to your municipal neighbors as well, and recognizing that there's a regional demand and a regional component with new facilities coming online has impacts. So keeping them abreast of your plans as well was requested. Next slide. So to help craft some options and operating model for a new facility, we recognize the transformational impact of that multi-use recreation centers can have on our community. Our experience shows that quality indoor recreation facilities facilitate healthy and active lifestyles, and venues such as this can accommodate a variety of activities simultaneously, which is not only convenient just for residents, but also helps to create an activity hub that's critical to your economic and social health of your community. So it's a critical mass that really enables, it tends to be greater than the sum of its parts when put together. So on your screen, I won't read through them, but there's several key aspects that, based on our experience, multi-use facilities can bring to the table. Next slide. So building on that, we established 10 guiding principles. I do have another slide on this in a moment. This is grounded in the public input and what we heard and what came out of your existing documents, but together they articulate what we hope, what the town hopes to achieve with respect to indoor recreation facilities. Again, that healthy community, active lifestyles, the clarion call of action to really think beyond the rink. It's not just about arenas anymore. Not to say they're not important, because they certainly are. They're a great anchor for facilities like this. But making sure that it's multi-generational, that it's multi-season, year-round opportunities under one roof, being strategic, planning for the future. I think it was said earlier, this is a marathon, not a sprint. That's absolutely true. So we need to keep an eye on that. The ability to enhance geographic and barrier-free accessibility. So putting them in a location that is accessible for most. Next slide. Addressing local needs first, but also considering broader regional factors that may be at play here. Prioritizing flexibility and design, and where that comes in is allowing for future expansion potential. We do have, I'd love to say we have a crystal ball when it comes to this. I think a lot of work went into the study to suggest what that could look like, but we'd be fools to say, 20, even 10, 20 years down the road, there could be additional considerations and changes in growth within your community that may necessitate expansion. Environmental, climate change, energy efficiencies, that's all important, as well as partnerships, and certainly ensuring fiscal responsibility and affordability to your residents. Next slide. So all of that culminates in the validation of facility needs, and The study goes into great depth around an assessment of these components, but your list here 1 through 9 are really the core components that we saw as recommending within a new facility. Many of these are replacement. Some of them are in addition to and would allow for expanded opportunities within your community. So the needs assessment spoke to a single ice rink at this time. Over the next 10, 15 years, we don't anticipate a substantial demand to support a second ice pad for ice hockey and ice and traditional or the ice sports that your arena accommodates. But I'll speak more to that in a moment. Indoor walking track, year-round, all ages, all abilities type of amenity. Gymnasium, very flexible space for more active elements that you can't currently accommodate within your community very easily. Schools do have gymnasiums, but they are not reliably accessible to your community, and many of them are not adequately sized to accommodate the demand when it's needed. So, things from certainly basketball, volleyball, pickleball, to other community gatherings, fitness, and so on. A bank of multi-purpose program spaces that could allow for gatherings, meetings, activities, and everything in between. Continued partnership with the Sports Hall of Fame. Potential for some tenant space, whether that be a pro shop, concession, support space, town staff offices, as it's very common for community services to have space within facilities such as this if that's needed in your community. There'd be other spaces there as well. Future expansion space and outdoor amenities are always pluses when it comes to these as well. But that's, I think, part of the work that still needs to become to define that. The optional component here is really the potential for a second ice pad, and you'll see that there is a second ice pad recommended within the recommended option. It could be curling, it could be longer term converted to ice needs if and when demand grows into that. We recognize more conversations are needed with potential partners around some of those spaces in particular. But there is some benefit operationally to having essentially what would be a twin pad facility. You can do it with generally the same amount of staff. The ice plants, there's efficiencies there as well. So there's some benefit to considering that. Next slide. We did consider, but ultimately did not recommend the inclusion of an indoor pool. For communities of your size, this really is a cost prohibitive sort of element. We also recognize you have partnerships existing locally as well as other regional opportunities that are generally meeting needs. We know it may not be the same as having a municipal pool, but access through the YMCA, access through Waypoint really are unique opportunities that not all small communities do have. At the same time, the expansion potential in the future may allow for consideration of this or other amenities should there be a demonstrated need and business plan. Fitness and wellness center, feel that that's adequately addressed in other means. Indoor turf, outdoor sports fields, we recognize that really was not part of our assessment, but understand that the community uses the field that's at 51 Dunlop, so that may be part of your future considerations. And public libraries, cultural centers, those are sometimes included within multi-use facilities, but not identified as corporate priorities at this time. Next slide. So I'll shift into, that was the needs. I'll shift into the location assessment. This is detailed in pretty good detail within the staff report. So I'll fly over it here pretty quickly, but we really established a number of criteria and a detailed site evaluation exercise was undertaken around that. What we needed really was probably the key criterion here was an adequately sized site to accommodate the building itself, a bit of expansion potential, and the parking associated with that. So preliminary assessment suggested that was 4 hectares or 10 acres of land to accommodate that type of facility. So that ruled out a number of different sites. It really left us with 4 shortlisted sites that I'll be on the next slide in a moment. We also wanted to make sure it was an accessible, centralized location that had a good base of support or potential support within your community, and that it offered some sort of value added benefit. So the 14 criteria were structured around that. Next slide, please. You'll see the 4 sites that were shortlisted at that time based on those key overarching criteria. This is listed in no particular order here, but A would be 51 Dunlop site. B would be Ojibwe Landing site on in and around the waterfront. C is a privately owned site on the east side of town on Fuller Avenue. And D was lands just immediately south of 51 Dunlop that were vacant and owned by part of Georgian Village. Those are no longer available, we understand, as they're the subject of a development application. Next slide. So using a weights and measures approach, we scored the different sites based on those 14 criterion. And very, very clearly, the 51 Dunlop site, the former Penetangishene Secondary School, scored highest, 91 out of 100 potential points on that scoring ranking. The other 2 sites that remain potentially available, Ojibwe and the Fuller Avenue sites, were in the 60s and 50s on that scale. So I think that was part of the reason why it was brought forward for considerations for your future consultation program. Next slide. So a bit about from our assessment, and you'll have a purview provided through your planning department of the site, but it is now in municipal ownership. It's fully serviced, it's flat, it's development ready. It's near existing residential areas, including seniors, communities, schools, future growth areas. These are all very strong indicators for future success for a recreation center. It's a large, well-configured block of land, so allowing for different building options, future expansion potential. Has good access to transit, active transportation links. It was recommended through some previous planning efforts as a potential location, and could have some potential for an outdoor sports field, for example. Next slide. So based on the needs and those assessments, the study outlined 4 different options. First being status quo. Just continue to maintain the facilities that you do have. This really is your short-term option and something that you're continuing to move forward until if and when a decision is made on another option. But we recognize that the time is ticking here. So options, there's 2A and 2B. They're very similar options. Both of them include the development of a new multi-use recreation center to replace your existing facilities. One would include curling, one would not include curling. That may be a partnership dependent piece. And then option 3 was a bit of a hybrid approach. I don't think it really received a lot of support, but we, in being thorough, we wanted to make sure it was explored. And that would be to develop a new multi-use facility, but look to repurpose your current arena as a curling facility, to essentially move the curling club off of their property on the water into your existing arena. That would still require upgrades, but it allows the council to fulfill their strategic goal of different uses along the waterfront. Next slide. So costs, operating and capital were generated for each of these, as well as drawings. Those are documented throughout the study. The costs at the time, and this was 2021, so they're shown in those year dollars. They don't account for escalation. They're Class D estimates, which are really plus minus 20%. It's typical for this stage of the process to include this level of costing as you move through and the project becomes more concrete. It'll move to Class C, Class B, and ultimately Class A, and the contingency gets smaller and smaller as you go. These costs were identified at a time when rising steel, market fluctuations, challenges and human resources and getting contractors, they were very apparent at that time. So these are not necessarily pre-pandemic dollars by any means. I think they're, they have some relevance to today, but we are seeing tenders that are wildly all over the place, to be frank. So it is a volatile time to be bringing major projects to the market. These are full project costs, so this includes construction as well as soft costs, project management, architectural fees, everything but and site development, which is important, parking and whatnot includes that. Does not include land acquisition, does not include any substantial remediation. So if you were to locate this on the Ojibwe landing property, we know there's extra costs associated with that. Next slide. So I know that the $49 million option, that I think that's the number that's been quoted quite frequently within your reports. That's through option 2A. That is the higher end. It really depends. The key factors here for option 2A are really the amount of seating that you put into the facility and whether you design it on 1 or 2 levels. So these are design-based decisions that you really don't necessarily need to make today. But we wanted to give you the full range of impact there. If you want a 500-seat arena or a 1,000-seat arena, if you wanted a 1 or 2 levels, there's a volatility or a range there of in the quantum of maybe $4 or $5 million that comes to play there. So you'll see option 1, which was let's just reinvest based on our building condition assessments that suggests we need about $7 million to put into the facilities over the next number of years, versus building new in some variation anywhere from about 37 million to 49 million. Next slide. Option 2A was the new mark with a curling or second ice pad and substantial seating was the most supported recommendation and option through our open house that was held in June of 2021. 80% of attendees at that meeting voted for that. It is also consistent with what we heard throughout our various consultations on the study. So based on that basis, the recommendation was to move forward with consideration of option 2 at the 51 Dunlop Street site. In the next few slides, just illustrate what that could look like. This is just on a 4-acre site. It's not necessarily sized to a 10-acre site. I believe your Dunlop Street lands are about 15 acres, so it's not sized to that necessarily, but it would certainly fit with some land left over. It just illustrates what that massing might be on a site like this. Certainly parking is a significant component. The ice sheets themselves and the other spaces, you can see how they compare in size. Next slide. So that was bird's eye view. This is our plan view. This is more bird's eye, and you see we get a bit more of a feel for the 3D elements of a potential site. Next slide. And this is only here to illustrate what some of these components might look like in some newer builds from across the province, from the gymnasium component to the walking track, likely around an arena, to fitness and activity rooms, to larger open space lobbies, good lighting, and what you don't see here is a lot of the energy efficiency pieces that are much more critical to their operation of these facilities as well. Next slide. So just have a couple more to go here. Starting to think a bit about partnership potential. We laid a little bit of groundwork for this within the report. We recognize that many municipalities are seeking new and creative opportunities to work with others that might be working with outside entities. YMCAs are a good example that you have in your region, but there's plenty of other providers, and whether they're operators, service providers, whether they're co-location type of options, those all exist. Again, you're part of a larger region as well. There's been some history of cooperation between municipalities in your area around cost sharing. Those are all considerations that you might take moving forward. But as the facility takes shape and the strategy takes shape there, the recommendation was to solicit proposals from proponents wishing to participate in the project. You would look to maintain, to establish some key conditions. You know, what is the municipal mandate? You want to make sure that there's consistency with what you're trying to achieve, that risks and benefits are appropriately balanced. The ARC study does provide a framework for developing these sorts of partnerships. There's a lot of things to consider, from control and governance to access, time of use, responsibilities, synergies, funding. If you're considering other uses for the site, is it large enough to accommodate them? Again, that time of use is a key aspect of it as well. We know there's many examples of municipal school partnerships within Ontario with varying degrees of success. They often involve more secondary schools that have a need for recreational amenities that might be more consistent with the recreation center. Pools, gymnasiums are usually the big ones. There's not a lot of school arena partnerships. If so, it might be part of a campus, a co-located opportunity. And I would say that's less of a partnership, but more of a co-location where there's shared use of parking and maybe some outdoor amenities as well. So I'd be happy to speak more to that if there's any questions. But just the last slide I have, or last two slides, I apologize. The next steps recommended within the study, we know this is going to take time. You want to be able to bridge towards making that decision and then starting to work towards it. So, you know, continue to invest in the necessary capital pieces for your arena. That's been largely done, we understand. Work to develop that funding strategy, establish a capital reserve to build towards a new facility. It's not a matter of you know, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Establishing that building committee to oversee the project. There's still many decisions. Nothing is set in stone, even through the work that we've done. So that building committee would be essential to moving a project like this forward, essential to vetting different partners and establishing the rules of engagement around that. And then ultimately, when a new facility is open, the redundant facilities would be closed and used for other, you know, could be sold, could be used for other uses. There's a need to evaluate that as you get closer to that date. But it's important that council understand and the public understands that there's many checkpoints in between, and that there's different consultation expected around design. That would be the traditional process. So the very last slide I have here shows sort of that ordered tasks. And what we said in the study, this is a 5-year minimum, even for communities that largely have the planning in place and the funding and the site in place. It's 3-year minimum. More likely it's 5 years to move to a new facility. You could be beyond that. That's up to your council to decide on the speed. We've dealt with the project vision, planning, and feasibility. That work is done. Now it's a matter of working towards design, then ultimately, you know, tender, construction, and operation. So I know that was a very thorough presentation. I'll be happy to pass it back to CAO Lees or maybe your planner. Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you very much, Steve, and good evening, members of council. I'm going to very quickly go over some of the land use considerations with this site itself. I'm going to refer to our policy and regulatory documents, our official plan and our zoning bylaw, both of which are newer and recently approved documents to help guide the town and the community in making decisions on land use with respect to this property. So with the beginning, I'll start on the official plan. In order to proceed with the development or construction there, any decisions with land use must conform to the policies of the official plan. And in this case, if we move to the next slide, Schedule A of the official plan talks about what the land uses are on this site. And so currently it's designated as a neighborhood area, which is a wide range of uses that could be permitted under that designation. This is our largest designation in town, includes our residential neighborhoods. So residential uses, small scale convenience, retail uses, community services, schools, parks, those types of facilities are typically located in this land use designation. I would note that it's 51 Dunlop is within the town's built boundary. That's only really important status because it talks to whether or not development there is going to need to meet certain density or intensification targets. So this will be an intensification site in the town itself. And so all land uses that have been suggested through the consultation to date are generally consistent with the different permissions in the neighborhood area designation. Next slide, please. Another schedule that's in the official plan is our Schedule B1, which is an overlay schedule. And in this case, similar to what we've heard around the importance of the site and the town's involvement in it, the town through the official plan recognized 51 Dunlop as being an important future study area for the town. And so this is an overlay, we call it, and it does require the town and the development of the property go through some steps in planning approvals, some consultation statutory under the Planning Act. It would require the development of a secondary plan or master plan that would eventually become an official plan amendment that the council would approve and then provide to the county for actual final approval on that amendment before moving on to construction stage. All of those studies, the official plan amendment is appealable by public and agencies. So that's a public process and an appealable process. Next slide, please. Lastly, just quickly touch on our new zoning bylaw 2022-17. This property is zoned institutional zone, and there's a list of permitted uses in the institutional zone. A school, a park, a community center are all permissions within that zone category. And so once a land use has been established by council, it could be that a zoning amendment is also required to facilitate whatever land use decisions made, whether it's housing or if it was to be some other type of commercial type of land use, that might be required. If it is to be an arena, then there would be no zoning likely required to change that. And lastly, just a quick suggestion on the development process. As noted, this would go through the public consultation as part of a Planning Act requirement. So beginning with the creation of a master plan, the master plan then feeds into an official plan amendment. The official plan amendment gets approved by the County of Simcoe, if required, a zoning amendment, and then into construction. So that's the summary of the land use planning components of this project.
Thanks, Andrea. Okay, so on to, I think our final piece of this next to the options is the community engagement background. So I think it's really important to note that what you saw and heard about today was a huge financial analysis of the ARC. You heard a general history, a rec master plan, a feasibility study, official plan, a community strategic plan, land use planning. This is all a lot of information. But what we were told to focus on in May of 2022 was specifically speaking to the public about the use of this property. We understood that there was no way the public could understand all these intricacies and all these details. So we've kept it very high level. We worked with closely with Red Brick, who is specifically a very highly sought after communications firm that works with municipalities. They actually had experience in doing public consultations related to this type of development. So it was very helpful for us to work with them. We asked the public for a very high level of would they, can we, I don't know if we go to the next slide. Yes. We asked them specifically about the items related to the rec center, housing development, health and community services, future school use, retention on future needs, or combined of the uses. And the reason why we did that was because we understood, we asked for council's direction because we understood we can't just go to the public and say, hey, what would you like to see on this property? We had to give them some parameters. So the opportunities that we provided them was an online survey, which was conducted from July 26, 2022, and it closed on August 15th. We had a public meeting on August 10th, where we had Red Brick actually come and facilitate that presentation and gave the opportunity for the public to provide in-person feedback on options available. Again, that was an opportunity for those who aren't comfortable with online surveys or had questions, because the survey obviously isn't going to answer any questions. And then Sarah and I also took the opportunity to attend the Bayside Summer Soiree at our amphitheater on August 12th. And we gave that in-person opportunity where we would actually flag down people as they were walking in to listen to music and say to them, hey, this is what we're doing. Would you like to participate? Would you like to give us some feedback? And so we felt like we had run a very comprehensive engagement strategy. The community findings. So with all those three things, we found 763 responses and interactions. And I think you heard our consultant for the ARC study say that's a significant amount. We recognize that, you know, there's potential for, there could have been people that aren't necessarily residents filling out that survey. We recognize that maybe people filled it out more than once, but we were comfortable with that. And the reason why is that because this is a very high level, hey, what is the community thinking? What's the community feeling? What's the community really want to see here? Understanding that the community doesn't know all the things that you just heard about today, and they can't possibly be up to speed on all the financial analysis, all the infrastructure needs, everything that you just heard about. So we wanted to keep it very high level in general, understanding that this piece is a very small piece of the decision, the reason why you're going to make this decision. It's not the community making this decision, council's making this decision with the input from the community. So that's why we focused on very high level, and we wanted to hear from the entire community. So that response, those responses and a detail of those were provided in September 2022. And the findings you'll see there. And again, we didn't say, hey, what would you like? And here's the top pick. You can see there that they had a chance to rate them from 1 to 6, meaning what you'd like to see there the most, what you'd like to see there the least. And you can see from the findings that the multi-use rec center was the highest, followed by the health and community facilities, future school site, combination of uses, and housing developments. And again, just to reiterate, we weren't able to say to them, well, how much is that multi-use rec center going to cost? We didn't have those answers. It was very high level community engagement, and also an opportunity to get all of our community interested in the fact that this was a potential development and that we wanted to hear from them. Next slide. So most importantly, we want committee and the public to understand that the public consultation for this is not over. This is not something that you're going to make a decision potentially here tonight, maybe, and okay, that's it. Let's just full steam ahead. There's obviously a lot more public consultation that needs to happen. And that the decision and the next steps is going to require council to make those decisions. And then once we have our next steps as staff, we will continue those public consultations, of course, depending on what it is that it has been decided. And that is it for community engagement.
Thanks, Stacy. So I'm kind of rounding out this portion of the presentation. What you see on the overhead or on the presentation is essentially 4 options that we've outlined. They're the very same options that are included in the staff report. We were asked by council early in this term, I guess back in December, to consider and look at kind of the next steps as it relates to 51 Dunlop. There was some talk about a potential terms of reference. So we've included kind of a couple different streams of options as it relates to a terms of reference. The first one being creating a terms of reference, putting together an ad hoc group for the purposes of going back to the community and doing consultation and engagement. From staff's perspective, we're not recommending that option, given what we just heard from our clerk as it relates to the strategy that's already been conducted as it relates to consulting the public, engaging the public, and hearing from the public. Kind of option 1B, if you will, was similar vein, create an ad hoc committee, pull together a group, put together a terms of reference, but for the sole purpose of creating a land use decision Is it a rec center? Is it a school? Is it a future health related facility? What's the future use of that property? Again, staff aren't recommending that option. We feel that ultimately there's been a significant amount of work related to the ARCs, for example, as well as bringing it would require a substantial amount of work to bring a group up to speed. And at the end of the day, this is a decision that ultimately council is tasked with. Option number 2 was not to create a terms of reference, but further explore, further analyze the 6 potential land uses that the previous term of council solidified, and ultimately have council make that decision in the near future. And then option 3, which is the option that staff are recommending this evening, and it's kind of summarized in the recommendation or the motion, is ultimately dedicate this council through a motion at tonight's special committee meeting, is to dedicate the appropriate amount of land at 51 Dunlop for the purpose of a future multi-use rec center, as well as continue to explore viable partnerships that might fit well with a future MRC or multi-use rec center. At the end of the day, staff came to this kind of recommendation, if I can say that, based on the fact that we know what everything we just heard and the ARC study that we did. We know that there's going to be a need in the future for land to be dedicated to a future rec center, future rec facility. And so that's often one of the biggest challenges that communities face, is securing the appropriate lands to have available to themselves to build. And if I think of the 4 shortlisted options that Steve walked us through this evening, really 2 of them, 2 of the 4 are off the table, and the 4th one is a privately owned site. So, that in itself says to me that, while there were 4 shortlisted sites and 8 sites were ruled out, 2 of the 4 are really off the table right off the hop. And so we know that land is going to be a challenge in the future. We know that we need land. We know that we're going to need a new build at some point down the road. It's what is the tenure of that? What is the time frame of that? Obviously is unknown, and really at the end of the day up to council. But whether it's 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, at the end of the day, there's going to be land that's going to be required. The other piece to the motion or the recommendation this evening is to continue to explore viable partnerships that might work well or mesh well with a future multi-use rec center. And there's lots that needs to happen for that to be undertaken, and it's not an overnight process. It's going to be a process that, we're going to need to get together with partners, perhaps explore some interest from community groups, etc. And certainly everything that we heard, through the public consultation, but also through the ARC study, again, pointed staff to this recommendation. So that, Your Worship, is a long presentation that we've provided to council. Hopefully council and the public have found it of value. And I would suggest that, any one of us here this evening, or certainly Steve, would be happy to take any questions through your lead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you to everybody for the presentation tonight. We'll start with some questions, and then once we're done the questions, we'll go to the motion before us. I'll look online first. I'll look to Councillor Leroux or Vadabanker. Any comments or questions on any information presented this evening?
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't basically have any questions. I was privileged of sitting on the committee that was part of the Monteith Brown study, and as we saw, the study is very extensive and very well done, and I congratulate Steve on a job well done. And we can see that it's a report that is much leaning to a new community center for all ages. So I'm going to reserve further comments, and I basically don't have any questions at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vadabanker.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments. First of all, I'm going to be supporting the staff recommendation I appreciate the effort that's gone into summarizing all the information this evening, both our consultant and staff. Thank you very much for doing that. I want to just turn my mind and turn the group mind back to the structural assessment of the current Penetanguishene Community Center. In the financial report, it talks about the last time a full structural assessment of the community center was done. I believe that was in 2019. And it talks about how these studies are typically done once every 5 years. And it's approximately that time again to do that review. For me, I'd really like to see a comprehensive structural and mechanical assessment of the existing Penetanguishene Community Center with a view to see if it is of a condition that it could be repurposed going forward for curling, for example. In my mind, that piece of information is lacking in everything we've got. There's certainly been some analysis. There's certainly been a review done, and that's been outlined this evening. But it's been mentioned that it's structurally sound. Well, how sound is it? And does it have a life? Is it 20 years, 50 years? Can it be repurposed for another use? Or is it just putting good money, tossing good money aside? So that would be something I would be very much interested in seeing. I support the concept of a multi-purpose facility. I also support the concept of partnerships. The partnership I think we need to really explore is with the Protestant Separate School Board with respect to the relocation of Burkeville. I think that is an excellent opportunity to incorporate an educational facility with a gymnasium, maybe a secondary school size gymnasium that we can attach to the new multi-purpose facility and make it a true community hub. But those are conversations that yet to come, but at least you know where I'm coming from, Your Worship, and certainly I'll be advocating for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Vadebunker. Jeff, do you want to speak to Councillor Vadebunker's inquiries about the condition assessment and what that looks like and what, when we could address those issues he identified?
Yeah, through Your Worship, I'm going to actually ask our Director of Rec and Community Services to speak to that, if you don't mind.
Thank you, through Your Worship, to Councillor Vadebunker. So in 2017, that was a question of council at the time, was to do a building condition assessment to understand what the long-term financial requirements were of the facility. So that was provided to Monteith Brown to include in their study. Additionally, because the facility was structured previous to some changes in the Ontario Building Code, we are required to have a structural analysis completed every 5 years. That will be something that we always have to do. So you'll see in the capital program for 2024, we have some money set aside. So we'll do that on the curling club and the arena every 5 years because we're required to do so. And that essentially that just tells us that it continues to be structurally sound. If council wishes for us to update those studies earlier, we can certainly do that. We do keep regular review with Simcoe Refrigeration, who looks specifically at the ice plant. And we do have some information to bring forward to council during the next capital budgeting process, but we can certainly advance that as well.
Thanks, Sherry. Does that answer that for you, Councillor Vadebunker? Any further follow-up on your inquiry?
Thank you, Worship. I think that the directors covered it. I think the 2024 timeframe is fine in my mind. I think though that the mechanical piece really needs to be looked at, and it really needs to be comprehensive. And I think we have 2023 to draft robust terms of reference that we can, as a municipality, issue and get skilled consultants to come in and do the structural as well as mechanical assessment to determine if the facility can be used in the future with minimal expense. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Mershaw.
Thank you. Thank you to staff and to the consultant for providing us this overview. It was very informative and a lot of really great information that helps us, as you know, me specifically as a new member of council, to understand all of the work that has been put into gathering the information and understanding how we want to look at the land use, which I understand is the decision before us today. So I do appreciate that there was a significant amount of consultation out in community, and we did have really great response, which I'm happy to see. And I what also is clear is that there is still lots more consultation to do. This is not a done piece, which I think is so important. But I really am excited about, looking that we have this land because, when we look to future needs and other pieces, that's a big part of this. And this is a long-term project, but one that I know is quite exciting. And I think that is the right piece of property. And I will be supporting the motion that the recommendation from staff tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Mershaw. Deputy Mayor LaRose.
Thank you, Your Worship. As being part of the last council, we did look appropriately at buying 51 Dunlop Street. I still think it was a good idea to have. I think it's a great thing for us. I think this is the appropriate use of that property. It's been a school forever. It's been a public area forever. The only thing that worries me in the short-term part is the amount of money. If we look at PMHA players, I don't know what their numbers are. Are they going up? Are they going down? When we look at what our operating costs would be for a new facility, it's 1.5% on our taxes. We have a $3 million debt on the property since we purchased it back then. So there's going to be some time to pay that down. We talk about increasing the cost because it would be a new facility and how much more ice time and stuff would cost. Not being 100% sure, but I believe that ice hockey now are not renting our ice at our place sometimes for practices and stuff. They're going to Portman Nickel. So they mostly because they say they don't want to pay the new rate. So if we're only going to be adding money and adding money and adding money, I think we really have to look at that portion of the program. The other part I have a little bit of a problem with is when they do a survey, if someone come up to you and said, would you like a new car? And you go, well, yeah, sure, I'd love a new car. Who wouldn't want a new facility? Well, what would you like in it? Well, I want this and I want that and I want that. Everybody's all right with that until they get to the point of what would they have to pay. So I don't think we've gone quite far enough on our surveys and stuff to ask the people that are not interested in it, as well as the people that would be interested. It's just a false question. But as for the land designation, having it up there, that was the original purpose when we started on that path 3 or 4 years ago. So I'm okay with leaving that land there for that.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to begin by really thanking the previous council. You've left no stone unturned, and you've made this super great for us because the homework's been done, the consultations have been done, the studies have been done. And for me, this is a really a simple decision for me. I will wholeheartedly be supporting this recommendation from staff. I support the site. It brings a good story to a sad story in a way. So I think that will certainly bring spirit back in the community. And unlike some of my colleagues, I feel that we will be landing some big funding opportunities for this arena. I sense that in the future, once we do get shovel ready, that we will be seeing opportunities coming our way to fund this wonderful project. So those are my pieces and my optimism. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. Councillor Waters.
Thanks. I like the location 51 Dunlop Street. That's we should be keeping it set aside for recreational facility of some sort. Funding, I don't see a big, funding doesn't concern me too much. It's the operating after. And I think we need to have more information on partners that we might get into this and ongoing partners. But that's all further down the road. For now, I guess the property, yeah, set it aside for the arena.
We have members of the public here tonight. Does anybody have any comments or questions on any of the information presented before us tonight? Would anybody like to ask anything of staff or consult? If you do, I'll ask you to come to the podium. Shoot. I will get you to go to the podium if you don't mind, Carolyn, just because we're online and it'd be appropriate that everyone can hear, if you don't mind. Thanks, Carolyn.
Andrea, you commented on the policy overlay. What is the time frame for that?
Through your worship to Carolyn. So it's initiated at council's discretion. And master plan, secondary plans can take approximately a year, I would say, is a good estimate on the time frame to do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Yep, help shove to the podium if you don't mind. Well, we're virtual and everyone needs to be able to hear. And we want to be open.
It just seems like it's going to take so long if we do make it a rec center, and we do need the extra land in case we do enlarge over the years. We're going to need extra land for other things we might want to develop recreationally. And the other thing is too, people go to Port Monaco for one, the showers have hot water. It's more available at different times, the arena, so. And you could have, if you make it a multi-use, you could have like badminton, all kinds of things. And we draw in tournaments and you make money with tournaments and that. And with COVID and that, a lot of people didn't go back to hockey or whatever. They're just starting to get back into it with their families, hockey and soccer and different things, right? So.
Thank you. Any other members? Any comments or questions? Jamie?
So a new facility would be ideal. And everybody wants a new facility, but Bill Waters really touched on my concern in operating a program. If the cost of maintaining the new facility becomes extremely expensive, obviously user groups will pay a lot more for their usage. And that in turn means we have to charge our members more, which in turn means our registration numbers generally will go down. I mean, if you're talking $10 an hour for ball hockey, that's not going to hurt, not going to make any difference. If you start talking doubling what you have to pay for floor time or ice time, it is significant. And, maintaining a new building will be more money than what the old one is. I'm just talking the general stuff, painting, cleaning the floors. It's bigger. It costs more money. And we know that people, even though most people are pretty respectful, it's not their own, and they don't come into the building and say, I'm going to keep this place pristine. They come in, they do their thing, and they leave, and they don't worry about how they leave things. So that all comes into, if you want a new building to look good 10 years down the line or 20 years down the line, you have to spend the money to maintain it. And like I say, if it in turn costs the user groups more money, and I think I'm the only big user group here right now, it's a big concern.
Thanks, Jimmy. Any other members have any comments or questions? Yep.
Anyway, my concern is if we have, it sounds like there's not going to be a pool because it's too much. So basically we're talking ice rink, and basically we're talking bringing revenue in I would take it, tournaments and whatnot. The trouble is, once the tournament fee is paid, where are people going to eat and sleep? Midland, We are just going to get those fees for usage. Everything else will go over to Midland because we don't have accommodation for hockey teams and tournaments and whatnot. So are we just going to end up supporting, another ice rink and not really getting anything out of it except the fees for the hockey tournaments? It's a lot of money we're talking, and we're in a horrible financial situation worldwide. Banks are crashing, interest rates are going up. I think we have to use the land for something. And multi-recreation building is great, but it doesn't sound like it's going to be much more than a hockey arena and maybe a walking track. So where does that appeal to, people our age that aren't playing hockey? And I'm not a hockey mom anymore. And not to say that we shouldn't have that, but for my tax dollar, how will it service me? And our taxes will have to go up to support this. But if it's going to be multi-use, and we have to see where we're drawing the money from. My taxes will go up and it's really nothing I'm using if it stays just an arena. I don't know. Anyway, you did a great job with all your work. Great.
Thank you for your comments. Tonight's motion before us is designating the lands to move forward with a concept of a multi-use recreational center. We haven't made a decision on a pool, an arena, a curling club, racquetball courts. It's designated for recreational purposes. There will be much more consultation work on what does that look like. I'll turn to Sherry for more things to add to that.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the opportunity just to address some of your questions and concerns about it. What's proposed is a MRC, so multi-use recreation center, and it's not just as Steve coined the term, think beyond the rink. It's not just the ice service and it's not just the walking track. We do know we've had seniors who say we'd love a senior center. It doesn't make sense to build a full senior center, but we currently don't have any space to partner with a group like Askinonia to run those programs. BGC Club runs our summer camp for us. They would love to run after school programs and different group youth activities, but again, we have no space to run those things or to offer them. So the think beyond the rink, the new facility would certainly serve additional purposes outside of a walking track and ice user groups, and would provide more year-round use, intergenerational use and programming for families on a variety of levels.
That would be.
So there's more work to do. We will do more consultation. Any more questions, Jill? If you do, I'll get you the podium. Okay, Jill, yep, help yourself to the podium.
Thanks very much. Great job by the staff. And certainly it was very, very comprehensive. And as Councillor DeRush indicated, there certainly has been a lot of work over the last few years to get it to where it is. And I not really a question, but just to reaffirm the things that Sherry was indicating as far as and what your worship has indicated, that this is only the beginning. And there's certainly looking at different partnerships. We've got lots and lots of opportunities to expand and to grow and reach. When you have a facility like that, it's going to attract more businesses and increased economic development within the area. So I think it's a great way to go.
Thank you for your comments. Any further comments or questions from any members of the public? All right.
Couple of specific questions. Okay. On your study with respect to Bracebridge and Wellesley and King Township and that, there are grant facilities that they got were, just all over the map. One place didn't get any, another place got 73%. Why do I get 73%? Except maybe I made it a green infrastructure. They built GBS and didn't make it a green infrastructure. They should be slapped on the head. Sorry. In terms of the $6 million or the $7.1 million, and I agree with Mr. Vedabon at that point. If that facility lasts another 25 years, $7.1 million is a pretty cheap, bill compared to 49 million now, which might be, by the time we get to it, 75 million. Other point, I love the multi facilities. We had a multi facility where I came from, and it had a seniors. We developed programs for the seniors. We happened to charge them $2 to come and play shuffleboard every day. The Legion didn't, and they left after about a month. If in effect our demographics are going to be my age, we try and get everything for that. We generally do, it's our kids that we invest our dollars into, sort of idea. And so you come back to the viability, the business viability of it. Well, unless you can turn around and somehow attract, 200 restaurant or rental, short-term rental facilities that are available for the tournaments are going to go to Midland. We've been sitting, like Jamie, you said, we've been sitting with a one-pad facility for the last, 55 years, 65 years, 75 years. I don't know whether there was one before that or not, but I assume there was. And we have a two-pad facility over in Midland, and it's not full all the time. And so, I think we scratch our head on a second pad. I don't think we have to scratch our head on it at all. Sort of idea. But maybe the other stuff we, is vitally important. You've got a survey out right now as to what we think of the town. If I think I remember it, and how can we improve it and what do we like best about it and everything like that. Well, we're on a hill. And I still can't find anything other than, 8 to 1 service businesses as opposed to retail businesses going up and down Main Street. I can find 17 hairdressers and I can find 1 retail store or two retail stores on Main Street. Until we can address that problem, we're not going to address the problem of getting a rental facility in town unless somebody comes along, buys a curling center and wants to put up a 3-story hotel. Then somebody over there in behind that facility there is saying, I don't want a 3-story hotel there, and it's going to go by the wayside. I think it's a great idea, and I think it's a good place to have it. I don't know whether we're ready, and I don't know whether 7 years from now we're going to be ready for it either, but it has to be looked at in that respect. Yeah, but I guess those are my general comments. I don't disagree with the idea. I think we're a little bit ahead of our time.
Thank you for comments. Any other members? Any final comments? I'm going to turn to council one more time. Councilor LaRue, Councilor Vedabunker, any further comments or questions on this motion? And are looking around the table? Councilor LaRue.
Your worship, I take it what we're dealing with here is strictly a decision by council as to whether or not we are going to retain 51 Dunlop Street for a recreation center. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're correct, Councilor.
Well, then I would say that we move on it.
Any other members? Any final comments, questions? My comments, I appreciate staff, previous council for your work. So I'll echo that. I just want to echo a few threads that were already said tonight. So Councilor Vedabunker, you brought up about the financial piece. I think you're right. I think that's going to totally dictate the timeline and the horizon, what this looks like. There's a lot of work to do. And I think tonight us designating this land will start that process where we can start doing that deep work on that. I also want to echo one of your comments about partnering. I'd echo your comment about Burkeville School. I know we've recently had a conversation with the Métis group for Georgian Bay about the cultural center, and is there a partnership opportunity there? I think there's a lot of these partnership opportunities that we need to explore, but there is no rush to this. Let's move forward and do that work. I also really liked one of the pieces in the report that spoke about really working with our neighbors. If we look to Midland, or Tiny Township and Dade Township, there's an opportunity to look at how we can leverage assets and that we're not replicating this, and we're looking at from an asset growth across North Simcoe. But the motion before us tonight is really about designating the lands, and staff can move on to the next step. So everyone's had an opportunity to speak. We'll look to the motion. We'll move this forward. But thank you, Jeff, to you and to your team, to everybody that contributes to that, and to our previous council for your leadership on this work. I think it's been great. And by hearing the sentiment around the table, I think we're doing the right thing by designating land and then taking our time. This might happen in 25 years from now. It might happen in 7 years from now. We don't know, but we're starting the first step moving forward. And I think one of the conversations we just talked about was, let's look at the financial partnership in other words. I have a motion, whereas the 2020 Arena and Recreation Center study recommends that the town pursue the development of the new multi-use recreation center, and whereas the 2021 Arena and Recreation Center study included a site analysis and recommends that the town advance the 51 Dunlop Street site as the preferred site for the new center through further public consultation on this and other potential uses for the site. And whereas a comprehensive community consultation project on the potential uses of 51 Dunlop Street was completed in 2022, that resulted in the community identifying a multi-use recreation center as the preferred use. Now, be it resolved that the town of Penetanguishene commit to ensuring that the necessary lands needed for the potential construction of a multi-use recreation center be made available at 51 Dunlop Street, and that the town continue to explore viable land use and partnership options that would pair well with the reserve use. I can look for a mover, and I see Councillor Roux, I believe, with his hand, and Councillor Vadabonker. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, we're going to call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. The delays because of the Zoom thing. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We have more fun to go on. The night's not over, but that wraps up that. So thank you again for everyone's work on that component. Moving on to our next item on the agenda, which is 5B, is our procedure bylaw. I'm going to turn it to you, Madam Clerk. If you can just identify this, what's our objective? What are we trying to achieve? And then we'll open this up for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Your Worship. So we've moved on to the procedural bylaw review. And so it's just for the purpose of updating council, but also just to help the members of the public that are online and here tonight understand the conversation. Basically, I want to just give a kind of a brief overview of what a procedural bylaw is. And a procedural bylaw is when a municipal council is legislative required to have an adopted procedural bylaw that establishes procedures for council, committee, or board meetings. Procedural bylaws are a tool used that set shared expectations for process, procedure, and conduct at council, committee, and board meetings. Procedural bylaws include rules for how meetings are conducted, how decisions are made and recorded, how participants, including the public, are involved in meetings, and how other meeting matters such as meeting schedules, notice requirements are handled. When used effectively, a procedural bylaw provides for efficient local government meetings and transparent decision-making. Some elements of a procedural bylaw are legislatively required, while others are what council chooses based on the common practice and provided the rules of procedure. Why this is important is local government meets and local government meetings and gatherings where council and board members are collectively moved together to make decisions. Most meetings on council or board are open to the public to facilitate public transparency and accountability. In order to be effective as collective decision makers, each council or board member must understand and follow a shared set of rules. So what I'm asking for council today, we're reviewing our procedural bylaw, which was enacted in 2019. So it's been a few years. We did a couple of amendments to it. The amendments to it were mostly around COVID. We had to make some shifts in how we did business because we were all working electronically. So those were the amendments that we made. Right now, currently, I'm working on going through the procedural bylaw word by word, making updates. I'm updating definitions. We've added a new land acknowledgement. I'm updating things that we've been doing, and updating things that I think we need to reset our procedural bylaw. Those changes need to be done publicly. So when that comes to a decision of council, that actually goes out in a notice to let the public know, because that's the way the public learns about what we're doing. What I'm asking for council today is for council to provide to me some suggestions on what they would like to see change in our procedural bylaw. Now, I would just want to add, I don't need any sort of, oh, there's a typo on page 3. I'm hopefully going to find all of those. What I'm looking for is some fundamental changes. If there's something specific that you see something that you say, hey, this would, I think, work better. This would be a better way for the public to interact with us, etc. And that's what I'm asking council for tonight. They're going to provide me with these suggested changes, and then I'm going to provide a report to council with their suggested changes, my suggested changes, and then ultimately my recommendation as their official to what I think would be a good procedural bylaw to proceed with. Ultimately, though, it's council's decision. They could make changes to whatever I'm recommending, and it's their decision to make this final procedural bylaw and pass it as a group. And I think that's it, Your Worship.
Thank you, Stacey. And Steve, just for clarity, housekeeping stuff like the inaugural change line with the election, we don't need to worry about that tonight, just fundamental changes to the actual procedural guidelines.
Exactly. So anything, I'm planning on updating definitions, land acknowledgement, all the committees, like transit committees not in there, all those little things that are automatics. Certainly if I miss them when we do the procedural bylaw, but it's more just that true fundamentals piece that I'm looking for.
Okay. Why don't we just go in order? We'll go Councilor Roux around the table again, same as we did with recreation, then we'll move on. Councilor Roux.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to our clerk, Stacey. From my understanding, the procedural bylaw at the moment does not permit members of council to take part in a special council meeting that His Worship would call and moving into in camera. That the participation in an in-camera meeting under the procedural bylaw right now, I understand, only allows actual in-person. Can that be changed where electronic participation of members of council could take part in an in-camera meeting?
It's definitely something that we can consider. I think it's important to note that the reason behind that was because we need to ensure a special council meeting isn't what you can't attend. What is limited is an in-camera session, which is a very confidential and private session. And so when we go into those sessions, we're in a very private room where we know the confidentiality is maintained. Currently, with a member participating electronically, we don't know if someone's sitting on the other side of your screen that we can't see. We don't know that there's not someone else hearing that confidential information. So that, I believe, why that was limited. But certainly it's something we can look into. And if council, certainly if that's what council wants as a group, we can make that amendment.
Stacey, for clarity, do you want us, like our referral items, to add these? How do you want us to make these that we can get them on here for you to bring them forward? Or you just want us to throw things your way?
Thank you for bringing that up, because that is something actually I wanted to attend, because at the end of the day, I want council as a whole to agree with whatever it is that I'm going to conclude in my report for consideration. So ideally, in camera. So if we could do that where, Mayor or Councilor LaRue is saying, hey, I would like to include in-camera sessions to be included electronically. The rest of the group says, yes, we all agree. We would like that as an item. Then yeah, I would like it to continue that way if possible.
Okay. Councilor LaRue, that was on my list. I totally agree. We've had 2 closed issues. I think you and for the two issues would add a lot of context to the conversation. Our lawyer connects virtually. I think the same level of risk from our lawyer connecting in as you being virtual, and we have a code of conduct and everything to police that. So I would agree with that. I'll look to council, little show of hands here for yay or nay on adding this item. So council, we're going to add that as a move to the second. I'll second the issue to adding the closed issue being remote. Look to council for support for this to let Stacy bring this forward. All in favor? And opposed? George voted. Let's do it one more time. All in favor, and let's keep your hands up for a second. Okay, and opposed? That's carried. Okay, Councilor, any other items for you for the procedure bylaw?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, not that I can see at the moment.
Thank you. Councilor Vadabunker.
Thank you, Worship. Sorry about that. I was having difficulty unmuting. So yes, thank you. I have two items that I'd like to bring forward for consideration by council. I did go through the procedural bylaw and I provided a number of comments to our clerk by email on two occasions. And the one that I thought I'd raise today was just two. The first one is with respect to the opportunity for members of council to comment. We now have an opportunity at the beginning of our council meeting to just provide a few words in terms of what we've been doing and kind of summarize anything that we've been engaged in. And we also have an opportunity at the end of the meeting. And I just thought that we may want to just clarify and make a distinction between the two so that it's clear for members of council what members of council are to be speaking to at both those opportunities to speak on general matters that we've been up to. So that was the one thing. The second thing has to do, Your Worship, with respect to Appendix C of the bylaw, which is the committees and boards of council policy. And I'm going to speak directly to the appointment of the Township of Tiny representative onto the Penetanguishene Public Library Board. As it's been noted, our procedural bylaw is silent with respect to how that process unfolds. For many, many years, the Township of Tiny submitted a name to the town of Penetanguishene, and the council of the day, through the mayor, appointed that representative. And certainly that was the case when I was employed there, and I think Councilor LaRue could probably speak to it as he's a long-serving member of Penetanguishene Council in terms of how it was done. This year we did it a little bit differently because as I understand it, the procedural bylaw was silent on the process. So now we have a Township of Tiny representative that's been appointed by our council. That was her name was selected from a group of names that were had submitted their applications to the town of Penetanguishene. So we have a town of Penetanguishene appointee to the library board. And my understanding is that the Township of Tiny, following that longstanding practice, has also appointed a Township of Tiny representative who has not taken her seat around the table yet because of this dilemma that we find ourselves in. So, Your Worship, I'm suggesting that for this term of council and this term of council only, that we expand the membership for those that are from the Township of Tiny to two members. We keep the board at 7. So there would be one council rep, 2 Township of Tiny representatives, and 4 members of the public. And that some language be introduced into the procedural bylaw on a go forward basis that we would go back to the longstanding practice, which was that the Township of Tiny would be asked to put forward a name for their representative to sit on the library board. I think that those changes would deal with the short-term issue that we find ourselves in, Your Worship, members of council, and it'll also deal with the longer-term issue in terms of how that appointment is made or how the name is selected for the person to sit on the library board. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Vadabunker. Just for clarity, Councillor Vadabunker, so we're all on the same page. Can the first motion, I think you're saying is that the clerk drafts a clearly defined path and route for the referral from Tiny Township to the town of Penetanguishene. Is that the first motion you're stating?
Actually, it had to do with just the two parts of the procedural bylaw where council members speak, one at the beginning and one at the end, that be more clearly defined. And then the second part of it is with dealing with the library appointment. Yes, if we want to leave it in the clerk's hands, I've provided my comments in writing to her on that, and I'd be happy with the wording that you've suggested on my second point, Your Worship.
Okay. Stacey, do we have enough definition from Councillor Vadabunker's second point about the referral process from Tiny to Penetanguishene? Do you have enough there to work with?
I have that but I think what you clarified was the process, but the specific appointment of two members is, I think, the two pieces. Is that what you were trying to separate them? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. The first one, I do. Yes, have that.
So let's look at that first one. So are you good with that, So your second piece, Councillor Vadabunker, the clear path from Tiny to Penetanguishene? Are you good with that one?
I am, Your Worship.
Okay, so you'll move that, a seconder? So the referral process from Tiny to Penetanguishene. So we're just giving direction to the clerk. So Councillor Vadabunker is moving that there's a clearly defined process between the referral mechanism from Tiny Township to Penetanguishene. So Councillor Vadabunker's moved that. A seconder? I'll second it. Councillor Marchand? Okay. Councillor DeRush is declared. Any further comments on this? Councillor or Deputy Mayor?
Thank you, Your Worship. Am I under the correct understanding that we are renegotiating their contract this year with Tiny for our library to the town?
Why don't we
No, I'm just saying if it is that year, Tiny may not want to be involved. Why would we insist that they put a person there when they may not be? If we're going to be renewing their contract, I had thought it was this coming fall, it would be the appropriate time then we could just amend the procedural bylaw to whatever the new negotiated system is.
It is in November. Maybe the clerk could put language in while we have an effective contract. Would that meet that? Okay. Any further comments? Let's call for the vote on this one. All in favor? And opposed? That is carrying. Councillor DeRush declared on that. Okay. Councillor Vadabunker, can you add some clarity to your second part of the library? I didn't quite capture what you're looking for on that second part of the motion about two members. If you can clarify that for us.
Yes, thank you. My apologies if I wasn't clear there, Your Worship. So we have a situation where council has appointed a Tiny representative, and that person is sitting on the library board. And the Township of Tiny has appointed a representative as well. So it was a temporary fix for this term of council that there would be two Tiny Township representatives sitting on the library board, one member of council and 4 members of the public, for a total of 7. Right now, the board, under the current procedural bylaw, there are 2 members of council and 5 members of the public. So it's just providing a little bit of clarity, taking 1 member of council off, adding the extra Tiny representative, and keeping the total at 7. Hopefully that clarifies things, Your Worship.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder on that motion? Councillor Marchand. Any further comments or questions on this? Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And opposed? And that's defeated. Okay, Councillor Vadabunker, your first thing you brought up was about the comments on the agenda. I believe that's already in the procedure bylaw now. I'll turn it to the clerk to clarify that for us.
I do, just to get clarity from Councillor Vadaboncourt, I think what he's referencing is we've added that new spot where it says comments from members, and we do speak to that in the procedural bylaw. It just was never on as an agenda item, but it is where it is referenced. But I think then what he's also referencing is the announcement and inquiries that's at the end, and sees it as perhaps a redundancy, but I'm just looking for clarification.
Okay. Councillor Vadabunker, clarity on that piece? Councillor LaRue.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't want to say it's a redundancy. I just thought that some clarity should be introduced around those two sections, given the potential for overlap or redundancy, just so that it's distinct. The two opportunities for comment are distinct in purpose. That was my intent. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Vadabunker. I think that's enough to make that friendly, Steve? Okay. Councillor LaRue.
Your Worship, I'm just wondering in this instance, if this matter should be addressed through procedural our procedural part here, or should it be dealt with through bylaw as opposed to our procedural policy here?
And sorry, Councillor LaRue, when you say issue, can you just add a little more clarity? I assume you're talking about the library.
In regards to what Councillor Vadaboncourt is brought up in our procedural bylaw, should we be looking at it now through this process, or should we be looking at a distinct bylaw dealing with this issue?
Well, before us tonight is the procedure bylaw, so I don't think we should go off of the procedure bylaw conversation. My feeling is we'll let the clerk take this away. We'll come back with a revision to the procedure bylaw. And then if it meets our needs and we want to do something at that time, we can always bring a notice of motion. But tonight it's about the procedure bylaw, duly noted about another bylaw we can look at when the time is right. Anything further for you on this issue, Councillor Vadabunker?
Thank you, Your Worship, and my apologies. I'm going to raise a point of order with respect to the previous vote. There was, I guess, you had read out that the motion was defeated, if I recall correctly, and I don't know if Councillor LaRue voted. I didn't see his hand go up or not, so I don't know if he voted or his vote was counted as a no. I don't know, so I just raised the question because I didn't see any action by Councillor LaRue. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Vadabunker. I don't recall everyone's hand position at this time. I just saw that there was more down, but a no vote, as we know, is a negative vote to the contrary. I'd be happy to repeat that process if council feels that that's appropriate. You're right, Councillor DeRush, you did declare. So I did see that go that way, Councillor Vadabunker, but if Councillor wants to relook at that, we can do that from a clarity standpoint. But from my lens, I saw clearly. Madam Clerk, do you see things as we saw it?
I marked it as defeated. I had no question, but certainly if council wants to revisit, I'll leave it to your worship.
So Councillor Vadabunker, I guess we could look for a notice of reconsider if we have 2/3 council want to look at that, but from where I'm at, that's what I saw.
Thank you. It's just a question of whether Councillor LaRue's vote would make a difference or not. I don't know. I don't know if it was counted. That's the only question. He didn't give an indication. Usually you say for or against, and those that are for put their hand up, and those are against put their hand up. If you don't put your hand, I guess you abstain, and it's voted. It's counted as a negative. So maybe that's how his vote was counted. I just don't know. Thank you.
Your worship. Perhaps because of the joy of technology, we may have had a bit of a delay. Perhaps just individually asking members of council how they voted and we can get that clarity, but I know you made the call and
Yeah.
recorded it.
I'm fine with that. If council's fine with that. I'll look around the table here. Okay, Councillor LaRue, can you just verbally announce your vote on Councillor Vadabonker's motion? Which can you add some clarity, Stacy, for us? What that
So
was?
yes, just for clarity, the motion was to expand the tiny township membership to be 2 members and have remove 1 member of council, keeping the board remaining at 7. And that was moved by Councillor Vadamoncourt and seconded by Councillor Marchand.
Thanks. Councillor LaRue.
Thank you, your worship. I am opposed.
And Councillor Marchand.
Support.
Deputy Mayor. Councillor Waters. You just go on your mic, please.
Opposed.
And for the record, I'm opposed. That motion's defeated. Councillor Vadbunker, are we okay?
Yeah, thank you very much, Worship. Sorry to take up
No,
time.
no,
I
no.
just wanted to make sure.
That's why we're here. We're open and transparent about the process.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Vadabunker, any other issues regarding the procedure bylaw that you would like to bring forward for council's consideration this evening?
No, thank you. I've raised 2. Thank you.
Sorry, your worship, just to go back to that original item for the clarity, the beginning of the and the end, are we including that as an item? Because we do have him as the mover, but no seconder and no vote. The clarity between the 2, ensuring that the comments
I
and
think we said that was friendly.
that's
and I thought
okay.
you
Okay,
said you're
sorry,
friendly with
sorry,
friendly.
I understood.
Councillor Rue, I think you had your hand up for another procedural bylaw adjustment. Am I looking at that right, or was this a delayed issue?
Your worship, I had no other one other than the in-camera.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Marchand.
Thank you, your worship. I would also like to talk about Appendix C, which is committees and boards of council policy, specifically under Section 2A, appointment of new members. Oh, sorry, no, recommendations of appointments under that same section. I would like for us to take the opportunity to really have further clarity around staff engagement and feedback and council member representation on those boards as we have committee members. When I look at this procedural bylaw, I feel that there was some steps missing this time around in our committee selection, and I don't feel that there was input in terms of kind of those public applications. And I think it's important to, because under Section B, it talks about, shall be forwarded to the applicable senior managers. I don't know that we have senior managers anymore. Is that directors? Are those key people within staff that sit on those committees? So, because I do appreciate that some of our committees are longstanding. There's some historical and just understanding engagement from the community and value that has been brought forward through these appointments. I think there's just I'd like to see that there be more engagement from those of us on council who've been selected to represent committees, because certainly those discussions took place. So really that recommendation of appointments, that it be reviewed, that section in its totality, in really ensuring that we follow a process, that all the appropriate people are engaged, that there's good conversation, and that we do speak to members of staff and, look at ensuring that public who've made applications for committees are considered for the committees that they've actually expressed an interest for, and not approached to be on other things that perhaps they have no interest in, that be looked at. And the only other piece too that I would.
Can we just leave that one just so we can add some definition? Stacey, do you have enough for that one? Do you need clarity? Do you need anything further? So you're going to move that. I'll look for a seconder for that motion. Councillor DeRush. Okay. Is there any further comments on this that's been brought forward? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I don't mind the definition part, but I don't think that councillors should be involved in selecting who goes on the boards. If you were to do that, if I was selected to a board, I would go get 5 of my friends that I know are going to be like-minded like myself and vote, and then we would be missing out on having a fair representation from the town. It would be an unfair thing to have at a committee level, if you were to be able to pick the people you wanted to vote with you to move something forward or backwards. So I like the process the way it is, where a community member comes and applies. It's like a job. You receive a resume and then it's decided upon then.
Thank you. Councillor DeRush.
I'd like to add that actually this was on my list. Committees of council are exactly that. They're committees of council, and they're probably the most important appointments we make in our term, because we're actually selecting people to provide us with guidance when it comes to issues like community wellness, like downtown revitalization, like all of those key things that are priorities for a municipality. And as a counselor, I would have appreciated having input when it came to the selection of those members on all of those committees. And I think that there should be a process in place. Right now, it talks about the applications coming through, being vetted by staff, and then being selected by the mayor. And what I would like to see is, I would have liked to have seen who had applied. I would have liked to have seen how they were vetted. So I think there has to be a process where we not that we mark, but that we grade the applicants to the committee, what their skill set is. It should be based on skill set. It should be built on what is their experience when it comes to that field. So there should be a grading system that could be done by corporate services. And then this would be presented, I would like to see it presented to council as a whole. And then we could look at who applied for what committee, what kind of skill sets do each of these individuals have. They would be appointed accordingly. And then when they do come for final approval, as a council member, I would have a clue. But the way it is now, we get the names of who is being recommended. We don't know who else may have applied. We don't know what their skill sets are. We don't know, are they a Francophone rep on this committee? Are they, certainly for community well-being, for example, there were some criteria. They don't know how they were selected. They don't know what, if they were a Francophone rep or if they were a community rep. So those are things that if we were involved as a council, we would be aware and we would know. And I think it would bring transparency to the process. I think it would bring clarity to the process. And then when we work with these people, it would provide us with a level of knowledge that would suit chairing these committees. So I would like to see this whole thing change so that it's more inclusive of council, it's more inclusive of possibly staff, and it would I think it would be important also to look at the skill sets and it may be done. I don't know. It may be done by staff and by the mayor, but I have no idea I don't know. So I would appreciate as a council member to have that privilege to choose these volunteers who are really the foundation of what we're going to do in the next 4 years. Thank you.
Any other members have any comments or questions on this motion that's before us? Councillor Leroux.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my comment on that selection is that actually for the last 50 years plus, selection of members to different committees and boards was always left at the pleasure of the mayor. So is the intent here to detract from this process?
Any other members, any comments or questions? No. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote on this. Oh, sorry. Who? Oh, sorry, Councillor Vadabunker. Comment or question?
Thank you. I guess it's just a comment. I guess as a referral item, it's going to be left with the clerk to review. What's being talked about is certainly a lot broader in terms of review than I thought. I thought that Councillor Marshall had some good suggestions. I think Councillor DeRush has taken it further. I think the process, the scope of whatever review takes place needs to be looked at, because I'm not sure that it needs to be as broad as has been suggested. That's my concern.
Thank you, Councillor Vadabunker. So we have Councillor Marchand's motion. Stacey, for clarity, you have that. You said you're good. Okay. We'll call for the vote in the support of the motion as presented. All in favor, and we'll leave our hands up till I can count. All in favor? And that's 3-4, 3 votes in favor of, and those opposed. And 4 opposed, that is defeated. Okay, Councillor Marchand, you said you had another motion.
Yeah, could we look to make a recommendation? I don't even know if it's at this table, but the Trails Advisory Committee sits at 5 members of the public, and we would like to see that increase to 8 because we're struggling, we weren't able to achieve quorum, the first time, and it's the only committee that only has a lower representation, and we would like to move that to 8. So I'll leave that there.
Madam Clerk, do you want that formalized or is that friendly?
To be truthful, I don't know the reason why it's significantly lower than the other committees. So it may be something that I would have seen, but I think it's important just to go through this process. But I see what you're saying. It's kind of an easy one.
Like I'm just wondering, instead of 8, if maybe that's something you and Sherry and staff can talk about, because they might say 9, they might say 7. Like, are you comfortable with staff looking at come back? He wants to vote on 8 tonight.
I'd like you to vote on 8. We talked about it as a committee already at our meeting, and I think we've had some good discussion. And Sherry, I think that was a number that we felt comfortable when we talked about it.
That's fair. We have a motion for 8 on the trails. A seconder? Councillor Rush, further comments or questions on this item? Apparently. Call for the vote.
One question.
Yep.
I'm just wondering why 8. I don't mind it being 8. I'm just saying 8 becomes a problem if it's 4-4. Most committees are all either 7s or 9s.
Again, the other committees, there's 8 on well-being, there's 8 on improvement, the Heritage Committee. So we felt that 8 was a good number to just go in line with what was already outlined on our committees.
Councillor Roux.
Thank you, Your Worship. I see where Councillor Marchand is going, and I think the problem or the difficulty, the issue that they're facing is with that number. Sometimes if you don't get the attendance, then a quorum is difficult to reach. So I would certainly go along with the fact that I think that that committee should be increased. I don't know if the number should be what number, but I think more than 5 for sure, so that they can adjust to having a quorum when the time is needed. 7 or 8, I think, wouldn't be a problem.
Thank you. For further comments? Motions to move trails to 8. We have a mover and a seconder. We'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. Councillor Marchand, any other items? Deputy Mayor.
I just had one, Your Worship. I just wanted us to review the process of us having one council meeting a month. Going over through the years where we went from once a week to twice a month, once a month. I would like the clerk to look at having a council meeting twice a month and dividing it in half. So 2 sections on the 15th of the month and 2 sections on the 30th of the month. But just to review to see how that would work.
Got a mover for that motion, a seconder on that. Councillor Waters, for other comments or questions on this item? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That's carried. Councillor Deputy Mayor LaRose, any further comments?
It's good.
Councillor DeRush.
I just have one item on page 13. It talks about a member, a committee cannot be physically absent for more than 3 consecutive meetings without the consent of the advisory committee. And I would feel that it would be more appropriate if they got permission or they got consent from the council and not from the actual committee.
Okay. A mover by Councillor Drush, Seconder? Counselor Waters, further comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That's carried. Counselor Rush, any further items? Counselor Waters?
The only thing I guess that I'm a little concerned about is members of the public. I would like them to be able to address council at a meeting over stuff that maybe isn't in the agenda. Not so much for discussion, but supposing somebody just so they have the ability to come to council and make whatever concern they might have known, not that they're going to get a response at that time, but just they have the ability to come and talk about what they want to talk about, maybe limited for a short period of time. And so if there was a portion of the meeting somewhere near the beginning, maybe where they could do that, so that if they can do what they want, and then if they want to stay, they're welcome to stay, and if they want to leave, they can leave. Would be it.
Council, we'll have to frame that into emotions and everyone can understand that and vote on that. I had this, that was my number 1 and number 2 item. If I can add some clarity maybe, or if I can add definition. My feeling is members of public should be able to ask any question. And right now on our agenda, we've got questions from the medium public. My feeling is that should be anything. So at the end of the agenda, debate's over, council won't be debating the issue, but you want to ask anything that wasn't on the agenda, you can ask the question. And then staff will research and bring it back when the time's right and will be on the agenda from an open, transparent perspective. I think that solves what you're saying. What I would like to see is above the agenda, before council debates it, members of public should be able to give their 2 cents on the issue on the agenda. So tonight, as the example, we talked about the arena. Technically, you can't talk about that until the end when it says questions from medium public. So I would like to move that up above. If it's on the agenda, before council debates anything and votes on it, we should hear from you. So if that's what you're suggesting, Stacy, is that from a crafting perspective? Is that
Just for clarity, because I kind of hearing 2 different things, because I think there's, so tonight, if we were said, hey, members of the public, we would love for you to hear what you have to say about what we're going to talk about tonight, versus, hey, members of the public that are here, come and talk about whatever you want. And it has nothing to do with what we're talking tonight, but we're going to hear about how your neighbor drives you crazy because their dog's barking. Right?
they are 2 different.
So 2 different clarities that I'm looking for.
So we'll do these 2 separate. So Councillor Waters, your first one was you suggested members of the public should be able to ask a question. I think what you were suggesting was at the question period from medium public, that's an open opportunity. It's an open mic with no response from council. And it's an opportunity for staff to take it away. I think that's what you were suggesting.
That's correct.
Yeah, with no response. It's truly go to the mic. It's open mics suggesting. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, no response. Just they can come
Ask
in and
anyone.
vent and talk about what they want.
Very good.
For a small time period.
We have a mover. I'm going to look for a seconder. Deputy Mayor, any further comments or questions on this piece? We'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? And that is carried. The second piece was the questions on the agenda items. And that would be crafted, that members of the public could speak to crafted items on the agenda before council debates them up above the agenda. I think that's what you're suggesting.
Sorry, Your Worship. I think the way I heard that original motion was that there be an open forum basically at the beginning of each meeting, which would allow for questions about what's on it or a comment about whatever you want. It's sort of just that's not what I heard.
No, agenda items only at the beginning. So before council debates it. Yeah. What we just added was at the end, question from the meeting public. That's any question, the barking dog example. Now we're saying if members want to speak to an agenda item, members of public can speak about it before council debates it. Council, are we good on this one? So this suggestion is if there's an agenda item before us tonight, that we provide members of public to be able to give their input before council debates it. Because right now they can only give their input at the very end after we voted on the issue. After it's been voted and passed or defeated, that's when we say, public, do you want to tell us what you think? Doesn't matter. We've already voted on it.
Sorry, Your Worship, I think I have clarity now. So the open forum would be at the end. The questions would be at the beginning. Sorry, that's where I had the disconnect.
Good. Councillor Vadabunker.
Thank you, Worship. I think it's important to just clarify a couple of things. Tonight, this is, as I understand it, it's a special committee of the whole meeting, if I'm correct.
Correct.
Yes. So committee of the whole is different than council. So committee of the whole makes recommendations to council. Council is the decision-making body. So all the recommendations that are coming from committee of the whole tonight will go to the next appropriate council meeting, and council will make a final decision on that. I have no issue with what you're suggesting if the input is at council. I don't support input at committee of the whole and then input at council again. It's more if we had the discussion at committee made a recommendation, and a member of the public reading the recommendation says, oh, I think they missed something. I want to make a comment at council before council makes the decision. I have no issue with that. It's just that having it done at both, I would be concerned. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear in terms of when this opportunity would be provided. Thank you.
So this second piece about the members of public can speak to an agenda item. If that's something we want to move, we need a mover for that. And Chair, I need someone to move that if that's something we want to do.
Council, not at a committee.
Okay. So at a council meeting that a member of public can bring forward and discuss an item before council debates it.
Correct.
A seconder. Councillor Waters, further comments or questions on this? Councillor Marshall.
I think Councillor Vitavancourt, thanks for bringing that forward, because I think that's the piece is cart before the horse and horse before the cart. We want to hear from the public, but we want to ensure that it's at the appropriate time so that I think for me, it's if we can't have it at both ends of the bookcase. And I think that's the piece that by ensuring that this is from a council process versus when it's in committee of the whole, I think that's important in terms of adding the clarity around that piece of it.
Any comments or questions? Councillor Drush.
So just to bring clarity, so you're suggesting that this piece goes to council, a council meeting, not committee of the whole? Okay, so I would argue that I would prefer hearing what the public has to say at a committee of the whole before we debate the issue. And then the decision is made, it goes to council. I think that would be more helpful. So I will be voting against having that at the council.
Any other further comments or questions? We'll call for the vote. All in favor? Hands up if we can. And opposed? That's 4-3. That's carried. Okay, that was you went. So I think everybody's gone. Any other members have any other revisions to procedure bylaw? I have a few. When is our start time? Our start time is 7 p.m. We've had some members come say earlier would be better. Transit, accessibility. I think about staff. Some staff may be here till 4:30, then are hanging around till 7. I think if we move forward an hour, Hopefully we get more engagement, more people show up. Maybe staff don't have to be here as long. So this isn't a hill I'm gonna end on, but I would just suggest from an accessibility standpoint, move it forward an hour. Again, if anyone feels passionate, feel free to move that. If not, I'm good with it. I'm in the spot. It's not now. We said that one. We said that one. Last term of council, we removed two committees, Youth Council and Seniors Council. And I've heard many people in the community that feel that those voices need to be heard. Yes, they have one member at the Community Wellness Committee, but I feel strongly that those are two active participant groups that want to have an active participation role. I'd really like to see the engagement of a Youth Council and Seniors Council within the community again. So hopefully someone feels that way as well, and we can look at bringing up Councillor Waters, that we're looking at the inclusion of a Youth Council and Seniors Council. Seconder? I'll second that. Further comments or questions on that? Sorry, Councillor Marsha.
I'm not opposed to hearing from those voices. They're important voices in the community. Absolutely. I do believe that there was a significant recommendation and report brought forward that that we were encouraged through a report to reduce the amount of committees that exist for the size of our town, and also the amount of time that it draws on staff. Those meetings have dedicated staff, additional council members. Our council is also smaller. We are no longer a council of, we've down by 2 additional council members. So that's adding, I chair 3 committees currently, that potentially may be a 4th. So that is additional responsibility. And I knew my responsibilities coming in when I decided to run for office. But I really do, we have a very lean staff, and in terms of adding another committee adds a significant amount of work as well. So I think the recommendation was to pull them together, the various committees, to ensure that we were covering everyone in appropriate groups, to ensure that feedback. It doesn't mean that we can't create ad hoc committees if we have special projects that we need that particular input, but I wouldn't be supporting it at this time.
Thank you. Any further members, comments, or questions? Councillor Drush.
I would echo those comments from Councillor Marchand. I would also add that if this council does pursue the addition of a youth and a seniors committee, then you should review the mandate and the reason being for the community wellbeing committee, because that committee is mandated to look at not only accessibility and senior issues, but they also intertwine the youth along with just the well-being of the community. So if these 2 other committees do come forward, then I think we better revisit the Community Wellbeing Committee.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, thank you. Had your hand up as well.
Possibly the Wellbeing Committee is the place where this should be. I wasn't aware of what they were doing. I have had people come to me and talk about seniors and wanting to know what was available and how did they find out, but not just this community, it's the whole area. Like I had a lady in that deals with some new people into the country that have very limited language skills, and they're having difficulty. They want to become part of the community and learn what's going on, but they have nowhere to find out what's going on, and what is available would be in writing, and they can't really read, and they're wondering how they're going to find all this out. So if there was, I guess, if our well-being committee could look after the local stuff, but maybe the 4 committees, the 4 communities could somehow have a central place where everything would be, so that if they want to know where the Sweetwater Festival is, they can find out. If they want to know about the butter tart, they can find out. If they want to know about Winterama, they can find out in one place.
So we have a mover and a seconder for the inclusion of the seniors and youth committee. Any further comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? It's going down. And opposed? And that is defeated. Now, Stacy, do you have everything good if we do the motion with the recommendations as discussed in committee of the whole? Would that work for the motion?
Yeah, that's perfect. I've been taking minutes
Okay.
and keeping notes.
Okay. I'll look around the table one more time. Any other members of council, any final revisions or inclusions for the procedure by law? Okay. We have a motion that the clerk be directed to include the following additional items for consideration in the future procedure bylaw report, as noted from the clerk this evening. And for clarity for, I think, comment you brought forward tonight, Councillor Vadabunker, this will come forward at a future committee of the whole, right, Stacey? Okay, not council. So we'll look for a mover on these inclusions revisions this evening. A mover? Deputy Mayor, seconder? We need someone. Councillor Marchand, for the comments or questions? Call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. And our final item is C, janitorial services tender. Do any members have any comments or questions with this recommendation for us tonight? Okay, what we'll do is I'll turn to the CEO real briefly, if you can introduce this tender, and then a couple questions, and then we'll do the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I might ask is that our Director of Rec present this report and give a quick summation, if that's okay with you. And certainly I'd be happy to support her if there are any questions that are asked. Thank you.
Thank you, your worship. The town has a agreement with CA Sellers, a 3-year agreement to provide janitorial services at multiple municipal facilities. That agreement is coming to an end. So we released a request for proposals through bids and tenders to secure a new contract. It was successful in that we received 11 proposals, which provide some good competition. The lowest bid was substantially lower and currently lower than our existing provider. One of the provisions within the tender document was upon successful completion of reference checks, they were not favorable. So staff looked at the second lowest bid, and those references came back very, very positive. So staff are recommending that we secure a 3-year agreement with Corvin Building Services to provide our janitorial services in the amount. The overall contract value is $177,108.96. The reason that this is coming before council for approval is that our procurement bylaw requires council approval for any multi-year service contracts and it worth in excess of $100,000.
Thanks, Sherry. Deputy Mayor, you had a question?
Just a couple quick ones, if I could. Are these the people that are currently here now?
They are not
They
the
are not.
people that are currently here now.
My other question was, did we look at just converting, because it runs around $65,000 a year, did we look at hiring a full-time person of our own instead?
So the service delivery, thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. The service delivery, the town undertook a service delivery review in 2017. And one of the recommendations was that we actually look at insourcing janitorial at that time. So the last time we released a request for tenders, we took a deep dive into the cost and released an RFT to see what we would get. When we did the financial analysis of both options of the lowest bid received compared to insourcing, it would actually have cost to the municipality approximately $25,000 a year more. So we didn't do that analysis again this time around. We feel that it was done in fairly recent history and that we need to, that really nothing much would have changed, particularly based on the results that we received. So we're recommending that we continue to outsource.
Any other members have any questions regarding this item? Okay, we have a motion that the janitorial services tender be awarded to Corvin Building Maintenance in the amount of $4,775 a month plus HST for year one, $4,918.25 a month plus HST for year two, $5,065.83 a month plus HST for year three. And that the CEO and Director of Recreation and Community Services are hereby authorized to make minor alterations to the agreement that does not substantially change its content. And finally, that the clerk bring forward the necessary bylaw for council approval. I'll look for a mover. Councillor DeRush, seconder, Councillor Vadabunker. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. 6 is question period from the media and public. To the podium, please.
Usually, if you're watching from home, if these people here speak from their desk, I'd appreciate it if they came to the podium. Because you can't see them, you're hoping you hear them. Just a suggestion.
Appreciate the feedback. I believe in our capital plan, which we just approved, I think we have $90,000 in there for audio, visual, camera, microphone upgrades to council chambers. And I know our clerk is working on that right now, and a lot of upgrades to make it more accessible and near. So the clerk hears you loud and clear, and we'll make the necessary adjustments. Any other questions from the media and public? Thank you for the feedback. Seeing none, we're going to look for an adjournment at 10:02 p.m. A mover, Deputy